Chapter 33:43. Yi Shiwen's strength was naturally not something that others could compare to. Even other sovereign emperors could not compare to him. His figure had just rushed into the battlefield when his figure exploded on the spot like a bomb, setting off an uproar. Everything within a radius of 1,000 miles was directly turned into nothingness. None of the foreign creatures within this range survived. Whether it was Tao-confirming experts, divine kings, or quasi-emperors, they were all killed. Ordinary, peak divine kings could be invincible in such a battlefield and come and go as they pleased, let alone him. The advantage of numbers was nothing in front of him. Unless it was the same number of sovereign emperors, then they could still pose a threat to him. If they were not sovereign emperors, no matter how many people came, it would be meaningless. Swish! Yi Shiwen used his finger as a sword and swept out a startling sword light. It seemed as if he had plucked a river of stars from the sky and swept it out. The horizon was split into two wherever it went, and all the foreign creatures were annihilated. With his cultivation, he could destroy stars with just a pinch of his fingers. When dealing with these ordinary foreign creatures, it did not matter which move he used. He only needed to find the fastest way to kill. Slaughtering these foreign creatures was not beneficial to him. It was just accumulating resources for the human race. Not to mention the rewards from the Fortune God dynasty. The parts of these foreign creatures could be forged into divine weapons, armors, magic tools, and so on. Their flesh and blood could be used to refine pills. It could be said to be priceless treasures. Moreover, these were the outstanding figures of the foreign domains. Because they knew about the situation in the Fortune Divine capital, the ordinary soldiers were experts at Tao confirmation and above. Therefore, the foreign creatures' army had also sent out their elites. Now, they had naturally benefited Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen's killing efficiency was very fast. Even though he did not use his full strength, the speed of killing hundreds or thousands of foreign creatures per second was still very shocking. After a short while, they attracted the attention of the higher-ups of the foreign realm. After the god of creation was surrounded by them, the majority of them were fighting around the chaos origin formation of good fortune. They didn't dare to truly compete with them, so they were locked in a stalemate. But this person was different. From time to time, he would rush out of the range of the fortune chaos origin formation. No one could stop him, and he was invincible. He did not take this foreign army seriously at all. He killed a few times as if he was playing a game. This was something that ordinary peak sovereign emperors could not do. The outer domain's higher echelons were baffled. Since when did such an invincible character appear in the Fortune Divine dynasty? Perhaps only some of the outer domain's higher echelons who had participated in the Path of Fortune recognized Yi Shiwen and knew who he was. Even so, Yi Shiwen was much stronger than they thought. He was simply too tyrannical. They were not at the same level as him. On the path of good fortune, Yi Shiwen was already very strong. However, he wasn't strong enough to treat the foreign armies as if they were nothing. He was just like a celestial venerate. They didn't know how strong a celestial venerate was, but they were very clear about one thing. They couldn't beat a celestial venerate, but they also couldn't beat Yi Shiwen. To a certain extent, Yi Shiwen could be compared with a celestial venerate. But even if they knew how powerful Yi Shiwen was, they could not let him continue to be so arrogant. It was not that there were no experts in the Fortune God dynasty. Even if one couldn't stop Yi Shiwen, he could be stopped by a few more. This mission was ordered by the sovereign, so they did not dare to slack off. In the Fortune God dynasty, the relationship between sovereign and sovereign was even more blatant and cruel in the Fortune God dynasty. The heavenly venerables of the Fortune God dynasty had to pay if they wanted to mobilize the sovereign. But in the Fortune God dynasty, there was no such thing. They could crush the sovereign with tyrannical strength. On the battlefield, the closest emperor-level creature to Yi Shiwen had already appeared. It had already seen Yi Shiwen's performance. It was indeed incomparably tyrannical. However, it didn't have any intention to compete with Yi Shiwen. It just wanted to delay Yi Shiwen and wait for the others to arrive. However, a scene that shocked the entire battlefield happened. Facing this terrifying emperor-level life form that was like a rolling mountain, Yi Shiwen did not even look at it. He casually pointed his finger at the Emperor-level life form. It looked ordinary, but it set off a storm of loss. Then, the Emperor-level life form was cut in half by him. Blood spurted out, and before the body fell, Yishiwen grabbed it with his big hand. It only took a breath of time to instantly kill an Emperor-level life form. For a time, the entire battlefield seemed to be quiet. Everyone was shocked by Yishiwen's fierce performance. Because he was the only one on the battlefield who could kill in and out of the edge of the Fortune God Dynasty primordial formation, he was the target of many people's attention. Whether it was the experts of the Fortune God Dynasty or the Fortune God Dynasty, they were all paying attention to him. But after seeing this scene, they all felt a chill down their spine. Had this kind of character already entered the heavenly venerable realm? Otherwise, how could he be so tyrannical and terrifying? On the city wall of the Fortune Divine Capital, Emperor Li was dumbfounded as he looked at Yishiwen, who was displaying his divine might in the sky. He happened to be assigned here and became Yishiwen's subordinate. At first, he was still a little unconvinced, but when he saw Yishiwen again, he was completely convinced. That unfathomable aura told him what a terrifying existence this was. Against such a person, there was really no chance of winning. However, no matter how much he overestimated Yishiwen, he never thought that Yishiwen's strength had far exceeded his imagination. In these years, he had not stopped cultivating. Although there were many things to deal with, his cultivation progress was not satisfactory. In fact, he had only consolidated the cultivation of the seventh realm and worked hard towards the peak of the seventh realm. In terms of the cultivation efficiency of an Emperor Lord, it was already quite good. After all, it had only been a few thousand years. The cultivation of an Emperor Lord could easily take tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of years. This was already considered good. However, he discovered that while he was progressing at a normal speed, Yishiwen was rising at a rocket-like speed. Yishiwen was so far ahead that he could not even catch up to him now. The peak of the Emperor Lord was a realm that he dreamed of reaching. As for the heavenly venerable realm, it was still too far for him. However, Yishiwen, who was on equal footing with him in the past, had already achieved it. Killing an Emperor Lord was as easy as lifting a heavy burden and killing it casually. If it were him, even if he wanted to kill a First Realm Emperor Lord, he would have to put in a lot of effort. It would definitely not be as easy as Yishiwen. From this, it could be seen how much Yishiwen's cultivation had progressed over the years. As for the creatures from the other realms, they were even more shocked. That was an Emperor-level creature from the other realms, a well-known figure among the creatures from the other realms, a cultivator who had achieved the Tao. But now it was slaughtered so casually. Although they knew that it was ferocious, this was too much. Others were shocked by Yishiwen's ferocity, but he himself did not feel much. This kind of third-realm Emperor-level creature could not even pose a slight threat to him now. Once upon a time, when he had just entered the Fortune Divine Dynasty, his cultivation was only at this level. Now it was far above them. At this time, there was only the heavenly venerable realm in his eyes, and only the heavenly venerable realm. After a while, he was surrounded by 5 ferocious Emperor-level creatures. None of them were ordinary people, and any one of them was an astonishing existence above the 7th realm. In the army of foreign creatures, each of them was the king of a region. Originally, they should have each led a region to attack the Fortune Divine Capital. But at this time, because of Yishiwen's activity, they had no choice but to join forces to attack him. They wanted to delay him, or even kill him. Everyone held their breath and focused their attention on the center of the battlefield. This was bound to be another great battle, especially the defenders of the Fortune Divine Capital. Previously, their morale had been greatly boosted by Yishiwen's amazing performance. Now, they could only watch as these foreign creatures besieged Yishiwen. Emperor Li and the other imperial emperors could not stand it anymore. The foreign creatures were too despicable. Did they think that there was no one on their side? Although they were not as invincible as Yishiwen, they were not pushovers. All along, the Fortune Divine Dynasty had not been at a disadvantage in battles against the foreign creatures. In fact, they had even faintly suppressed the foreign creatures, so they had a psychological sense of superiority. But at this time, Yishiwen directly attacked. He did not wait for the reinforcements from the Fortune Divine capital and directly killed his way into the midst of these Emperor-level creatures. It was as if he did not care about these Emperor-level creatures at all. Yishiwen did not summon any Dao tools. He only intended to fight them with his own physical body. Damn it, they're looking down on us too much. Don't be too insolent. An Emperor-level entity was enraged. He was like a lion covered in blood-colored armor, and he was as huge as an ancient mountain. He directly rushed over, causing the entire sky to shake violently. It seemed as if everything would collapse in the next moment. He opened his mouth and whistled out a mouthful of sword light, which condensed into a long sword in the sky and slashed down towards Yishiwen. Bang! This sword slashed straight down and fell ruthlessly on Yishiwen's body. There was no way to stop it at all. Only the sound of metal clashing could be heard. The sword light directly slashed on his body, and sparks flew everywhere. Then, these sword lights began to crumble in mid-air, inch by inch. How is this possible? The Emperor-level creature suddenly widened his eyes. Although he knew that Yishiwen was powerful, he did not expect that his all-out attack could not even hurt a hair on Yishiwen's body. Was this still an Imperial Emperor? He was as powerful as a monster. But it was too late. He did not have time to retreat. Yishiwen had already arrived in front of him. Yishiwen's expression was indifferent, like a matchless god of slaughter. His hands tore the sky full of golden light, and he suddenly exerted force. In an instant, this Emperor-level creature was torn in half. Blood rained down from the sky. Chapter 33-44. A powerful Emperor-level creature of the 7th realm couldn't even withstand a single move from Yishiwen and was torn into 2 halves. His blood turned into a rain of blood that sprinkled down from the sky. Even his soul was completely destroyed by the golden light that filled the sky. Even their corpses were taken away by Yishiwen. Yishiwen was killing them while collecting their corpses for other purposes. This was very normal. It was also the same for the battles between foreign creatures. However, there weren't many people who had the leisure to do this in the midst of a war. An Emperor Lord could indeed protect himself in this kind of battle array, but that was all. It was impossible for him to go on a killing spree, not to mention taking away the corpses after killing them. As soon as this Emperor-level creature died, the other Emperor-level creatures immediately understood that they had encountered a tough opponent. Yishiwen's tyrannical strength was probably more tyrannical than what everyone had previously imagined. Although he didn't display any means, it was enough to sweep and destroy them. Even an Emperor-class creature would not be able to stop him, not even for a moment. At this time, they instantly understood that this person was not easy to deal with. Their strategy suddenly changed from the initial attack to defense. They no longer dared to hope that they could kill him. They could only try to delay as much time as possible. This kind of character was too strong. If they let him stay on the battlefield, it would only cause the entire battlefield to collapse. The Heavenly Masters had the ability to change the situation of a battle, and in fact, he already possessed a part of this ability. However, even if it was just defense, it was still a difficult task for them to complete. After fighting with Yishiwen, they had thoroughly understood why the previous 2 Emperor-level creatures were so vulnerable. It wasn't that they were too weak. It was just that Yishiwen's strength was too strong. They joined forces to defend, but under Yishiwen's attack, they still felt great pressure. Almost every time they collided, they only felt that their bones were about to fall apart. In their opinion, Yishiwen simply didn't put anyone in his eyes. He simply didn't care about the besieging army and directly attacked them. He even dared to attack them when facing the 4 of them. He treated them as ordinary people and didn't put them in his eyes at all. Yishiwen hadn't used any magical power or martial arts technique. He was just relying on his powerful body to fight. His speed was also invincible. Even if he hadn't resorted to devil wings, his speed was enough to crush everyone. Therefore, whether it was speed or strength, Yishiwen had the advantage. He could break 10,000 techniques with his strength alone. This was enough. However, Yishuan was acting very casually in front of them. He could pose a great threat to them with just a casual strike. Bang! Yishuan's punch landed in front of an Emperor-level creature and instantly blasted it away. At this time, a gap suddenly appeared in the formation of these Emperor-level creatures. Yishuan instantly seized this opportunity and rushed forward. His previous seemingly casual attack suddenly disappeared, and in an instant he had already arrived in front of an Emperor-level creature. This Emperor-level creature looked like a snake with a pair of wings. It opened its bloody mouth and swallowed Yishuan. This move, swallow the heavens and devour the earth, could completely swallow and digest an entire world. However, it was nothing in front of Yishuan. Yishuan just blasted out a punch and directly smashed this swallow the heavens and devour the earth magical power. At the same time, his fist penetrated the Emperor-level creature's head and instantly killed it. This Emperor-level creature of the 7th realm didn't even have time to react. It had already died a tragic death. Of the 4 Emperor-level creatures, 1 was blasted away and 1 was killed. The remaining 2 suddenly felt their whole bodies tremble, as if a peerless vicious beast had been born. And this peerless vicious beast was standing in front of them, as if it could devour them completely with just a casual glance. These 2 Emperor-level creatures didn't dare to stay any longer. They quickly turned around and fled. As for their previous strategy, they had long thrown it to the back of their minds. What strategy? Only if they could escape with their lives could they continue to carry it out. If they were killed, then no matter how good the strategy was, it would no longer have the slightest meaning. Moreover, these Emperor-level creatures were incomparably violent. If it weren't for the heavenly masters forcefully suppressing the task, it was normal for them to not put in any effort. For so many years, the outer domains had been suppressed by the Fortune God dynasty. This had a lot to do with the fact that they were like a sheet of loose sand. They were originally different races, so there was no need to talk about cooperation. However, even if they escaped, it was useless, because no matter how fast they were, they couldn't outrun Yishuan. Almost with a step, he caught up with one of them. He stomped down with his foot, causing the heaven and earth to tremble. With a war trample, the Emperor-level creature was trampled into a rain of blood. The corpse was taken away by Yishuan. The other outer domain Emperor-level creature only managed to run a little longer. Then, Yishuan caught up with it and chopped it in half with a knife-hand strike, destroying its spirit. At this time, Yishuan didn't need to rely on any doubt tools. Just relying on the tyrant golden form was enough to kill an Emperor-level creature. Ordinary Emperor-level creatures couldn't stop him at all. Only peak Emperor-level creatures like the Battle Emperor could pose a certain degree of threat to him. This was already the limit. Therefore, he didn't take the threat of Emperor God Rui seriously. Unless he became a heavenly master, there was nothing to be afraid of. The only thing he was afraid of was the space-time heavenly master. At this time, on a throne in the depths of the divine capital of fortune, Emperor God Rui's expression became increasingly cold. He looked at Yishuan with a murderous look in his eyes. The series of battles just now were under his nose. It could be said that he had a panoramic view. Because he had seen this battle, his fear of Yishuan didn't decrease. Instead, it increased sharply. In the situation just now, if it were him, he was confident that those Emperor-level creatures wouldn't be able to stop him. However, it was absolutely impossible for him to kill them as easily as Yishuan did. Moreover, Yishuan hadn't used his full strength. This was the scariest part. At this time, he seemed to be able to understand why a person like Emperor Eagle Horn, an expert of the 10 great Emperor level, died in his hands. At this time, he suddenly felt that he was a bit reckless. He thought that Yishuan was nothing, so he didn't take it to heart. His hostility was also blatantly displayed on his face, which made Yishuan put up a guard against him. At first, he didn't think that it was a big deal. At worst, he would do it himself. No matter how powerful Yishuan was, could he break through the limits maintained by him, Battle Emperor, and the others? Now, it seemed that not only had he broken through, but he was even more powerful. To kill such a person, one couldn't rely on brute force. One had to plan carefully. Thinking of this, his eyes flashed with the light of wisdom. He was scheming to eliminate Yi Shiwen one by one. For a moment, thousands of plans flashed through his mind. However, they were crossed out one by one. It was because Yi Shiwen's combat power was too amazing. All kinds of plots and schemes that were useful to others were useless to him. In the face of absolute strength, all plots and schemes were fleeting. In the past, he was a believer of this sentence because he was an absolute powerhouse. However, after he programmed the weak, he truly understood the helplessness of the weak. Because they couldn't fight head-on, they had to use all kinds of plots and schemes. At this time, Yi Shiwen on the battlefield had already beheaded all these Emperor-level creatures. Even the Emperor-level creature that was blasted away couldn't escape from his pursuit. His speed was too fast. He was like lightning on the battlefield, constantly flashing. Every time he flashed, hundreds and thousands of alien creatures would be slaughtered by him. His movements were also very simple. He just used his finger as a sword. After destroying an alien creature army with one slash, his figure flashed again and went towards another alien creature army. The spiritual power in his body was surging, producing a steady stream of spiritual power. With this level of consumption, he could fight forever without fear of exhaustion. There was carnage everywhere. Because of Yi Shiwen's active and hard work, he almost single-handedly blocked the attack of this alien creature army. At this time, the Fortune Divine Dynasty's army on the towering city walls of the Fortune Divine capital couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Following such a super strong leader was naturally much more relaxed and safer. It was not so easy to fight in other places. There were collisions everywhere like a meat grinder. Both sides had been fighting for years and had long understood each other very well. They were very clear about each other's fighting style. At this time, the fight was incomparably bloody. There were experts falling at every moment. It was impossible to count them all. The death of one person was called an accident, but the death of 10,000 people could only be counted as a series of statistics. In such a situation, who could protect themselves, even if it was an emperor-level creature? At this time, they watched helplessly as Yi Shiwen slaughtered so many emperor-level creatures. It was clear that on this battlefield, even an emperor-level creature might not necessarily be safe. Yi Shiwen was invincible on the battlefield. Suddenly, he felt an extreme sense of danger in his heart. It was extremely rare for someone to be able to make him feel an extreme sense of danger at his level of cultivation. Almost subconsciously, he moved back several thousand miles. Boom! The place where he was just standing was crushed by a finger. He immediately realized that a heavenly master had made a move. Chapter 33:45. The place where Yi Shiwen had been standing a moment ago had turned into nothingness. It had turned into nothingness and silence. Everything had been annihilated. Even the sound had been annihilated. So, not a single trace of sound could be heard. This was an extremely terrifying attack. Yi Shiwen didn't even hear the Celestial Master's attack. He just had a feeling of extreme danger, which prompted him to move with all his strength and finally escape. The Celestial Master's attack was indeed extremely powerful. Fortunately, it was not Yi Shiwen's first time dealing with a Celestial Master. Previously, he escaped from the hands of Pan Tian Master. Later on, he even killed the clone of Emperor Hun Yuan. In total, they had fought many times, so he was not ignorant. That was why he had such a warning sign of extreme danger today. But even so, this Celestial Master who suddenly attacked still scared him to the point of cold sweat. Everyone was silent at once, because Yi Shiwen, who was still majestic just now, was forced back by a finger. However, such an attack was just the beginning. Then, with the speed of a sudden clap of thunder, a finger fell down and fiercely pressed down towards Yi Shiwen. There was no actual move. It was just a simple finger pressing down, but it had great power. Any rules and principles were nothing in front of this attack. It was simply indescribable. Yi Shiwen could even feel the contempt in it. It didn't take him seriously at all. I can poke you to death with just a finger. What can you do? That was roughly what it meant. That was the pride of the Celestial Master. The pride of the Celestial Master who didn't take the Emperor Lord seriously. Even a powerful figure like Yi Shiwen, who was far beyond the imagination of ordinary emperor lords, was probably just SOSO in the celestial master's mind. They didn't feel anything at all. However, Yi Shiwen didn't have any sullen thoughts at this time because he didn't have the time to do so. He had already fallen into extreme danger. An unprecedentedly powerful coercion was firmly staring at him. No matter where he went, it would be very difficult to get rid of this formidable coercion. This was the power of a heavenly master. Because he was locked, he couldn't escape. So no matter where he went, these attacks seemed to follow him like a shadow, falling directly without stopping for a moment. And Yi Shiwen didn't dare to stop at all, because once he stopped, he might be pressed into powder on the spot. But in the end, this huge finger still seized the opportunity and pressed down on Yi Shiwen's body. Bang! With a deafening explosion, everyone could only see that the giant finger seemed to annihilate everything, turning everything into nothingness. Time, space, everything disappeared into nothingness. No one knew that under this giant finger, everything was annihilated. Is he dead? Everyone stared in that direction with their eyes wide open. Everyone had witnessed Yi Shiwen's strength. It could be said that he was invincible. Among the sovereign emperors, no one could stop him. However, the person standing in front of him was none other than a powerful heavenly venerate. He was a heavenly venerate that stood above all living creatures. Even emperor lords were no match for him. There seemed to be no movement at all. But at this moment, a figure leaped out from within and shot towards the direction of the Fortune divine capital like a cannonball. In almost an instant, he had already rushed into the Fortune chaos origin array. He's actually not dead. Suddenly, all the experts who were paying attention to this side seemed to be in an uproar. Although many people were already somewhat prepared in their hearts, and even hoped to see this scene, many people still felt shocked when Yi Shiwen actually did it. That was a heavenly venerate. Being able to escape from a heavenly venerate could be said to be a very remarkable thing. It could even be said to be almost recorded in the annals of history. Not to mention that Yi Shiwen had resisted a blow from a heavenly venerate head-on and was fine. Many people could see through the array that Yi Shiwen was in. Although he was in a rather sorry state, he didn't seem to be injured at all, let alone severely injured. And he's not injured. How is he so powerful? Even a heavenly venerate can't kill him. Many sovereign emperors and emperor-level life forms began to discuss. At this time, although the battlefield was extremely intense, no one was more eye-catching than Yi Shiwen. Seeing that Yi Shiwen had resisted a blow from a heavenly venerate almost unscathed, it immediately caused an uproar. In particular, those sovereign emperors were well aware of how terrifying a heavenly venerate was. Although heavenly venerates rarely fought, they were indeed the most terrifying group of people since ancient times. In particular, some time ago, a group of sovereign emperors and emperor-level life forms had joined forces to find Pantheon Venerate, while Yi Shiwen had just killed a heavenly venerate. In the end, they were all killed by him. Those sovereign emperors were fine, as they only died, but those emperor-level life forms were miserable as their entire race was annihilated. In this regard, the Fortune God dynasty didn't step forward. Even the heavenly venerates who were in charge of the foreign domains didn't step forward. They just tacitly agreed. Everyone was very clear that this only meant one thing. The dignity of a heavenly venerate was absolutely not to be challenged. Even heavenly venerates of different races and camps were surprisingly consistent on this issue. Whether they could succeed or not, whether they succeeded like Yi Shiwen, or whether they failed like those emperor-level life forms who were annihilated by Pantheon Venerate, they were not allowed to appear. This was because when the idea of challenging a heavenly venerate arose in the minds of those sovereign emperors, their positions were already in jeopardy. They weren't afraid of challenges from ordinary sovereign emperors, but they could only be thieves for 1,000 days. How could they guard against thieves for 1,000 days? This was because it was impossible for a heavenly venerate to maintain his peak state forever. There would always be times when he would be injured. If someone really seized the opportunity, it might not be impossible for them to be killed. In the past, it was absolutely impossible for them to consider these things. Even when they were at their most miserable, they weren't people that the sovereign emperors could deal with. Just like Pantheon Venerate, he had killed a group of sovereign emperors and emperor-level life forms as easily as if he was playing with a toy. They weren't on the same level at all. However, the matter of Yishuan severely injuring the heaven-devouring demon emperor with his trump card and killing him in the end had sounded an alarm for them. They weren't really invincible. If there were a few monstrous geniuses among the sovereign emperors, they might still pose a strong threat to them. Under such circumstances, there is almost no need for any discussion. Everyone reached an agreement in an instant and formed a tacit understanding that anyone who dared to challenge a heavenly venerate must be suppressed. They absolutely couldn't allow such a trend to become mainstream. Even though they knew that Yishuan's success was related to his own strength and a certain amount of luck, there would still be people who wanted to take a gamble. This was because the rewards that could be brought about if they won the gamble would be too generous. Therefore, suppressing these sovereign emperors was also a tacit understanding among the heavenly venerates. It was a pity that many laws seemed to have lost their effect on the biggest culprit, Yishuan, and were completely inaccurate. He could kill a heavenly venerate who had just broken through, and he could withstand a head-on attack from a heavenly venerate. The latter was far more shocking than the former. The former had already been thoroughly studied and understood. He had relied on that sword chi to severely injure the heaven-devouring demon emperor so that he couldn't exert his full strength. Only then could he win. On the other hand, the latter had relied on his own strength to resist the attack. Such strength was even more shocking because such a comparison was even more intense. Even a heavenly venerate couldn't kill him. How could this be? Even a heavenly venerate can't kill him. In a secret dimension in the divine capital of creation, Emperor God Rui's expression turned extremely ferocious after being dumbfounded. He had been paying attention to the battle on Yishuan's side. He knew that Yishuan, who had such an outstanding performance and was in the limelight, would definitely attract the heavenly venerates of the other domains to take action. The heavenly venerates of the other domains couldn't possibly watch Yishuan continue to be invincible and sweep across all directions. They would definitely take action. In the end, he had guessed correctly. However, what he hadn't guessed was that Yishuan had actually withstood the attack and hadn't died. This strength was even more exaggerated than what he had displayed when he had killed many sovereign emperors previously. Even when facing the attack of a heavenly venerate, he could calmly protect himself and wouldn't be battered and seriously injured. If it wasn't for his aura and strength, he would almost suspect that Yishuan's aura had already passed the heavenly venerate tribulation and become another heavenly venerate since ancient times. He had arranged for Yishuan to be at the outermost area in order to kill him with a borrowed knife. He wanted to borrow the forces of the other domains, or even the heavenly venerates of the other domains, to finally kill this thorn. Firstly, he wouldn't have to do it himself and be infamous. Secondly, he wouldn't have to fight this monster head-on. Unexpectedly, the knife had indeed come, but Yishuan wasn't a piece of meat on the chopping board that could be slaughtered by others. No, I have to think of another way. I must kill him, otherwise I won't be able to vent the anger in my heart. Many conspiracies and plots flashed through Emperor God Rui's mind. He had thought of all ways to kill Yishuan. He faintly felt a strong threat from Yishuan. If he allowed Yishuan to continue to grow like this, then sooner or later he would become a hidden danger, which would be disadvantageous to him. So, he must find a way to get rid of Yishuan before that happens. While everyone was discussing this matter spiritedly, Yishuan was standing on the city wall of the Fortune Divine Capital. He retreated a few steps, and only then was he able to neutralize the terrifying power of that finger. A heavenly venerate was indeed terrifying, not only in the use of nomological laws, but in terms of strength and physical strength. It was also far beyond the imagination of an emperor. However, in the instant that the heavenly venerate attacked, Yishuan had already clearly seen who had attacked. Pantheon Venerate. Yishuan slowly spat out these 4 words. Chapter 3346. Yishuan finally saw the person who had attacked through the layers of the void. It was the Pantheon venerable whom he had fought before. At this moment, the Pantheon stood with his hands behind his back in imperial robes, and he was in high spirits as he commanded the army. He didn't seem to be in a sorry state at all. When they recalled the shocking deeds of the Pantheon, slaughtering numerous imperial monarchs and annihilating their clans, who would dare to underestimate this Tion, who had just returned to the world not long ago? This fact taught others not to underestimate any celestial master, because they were not a freak like Yishuan. Just by looking at him from afar, the Pantheon sovereign exuded an unimaginable might. He had fought with the Pantheon sovereign once before and had nearly been killed in the end. Admittedly, he was not even a tenth as strong as he was now, but the Pantheon sovereign was probably not even 100th as strong as he was now. Too strong. He didn't know if Pantheon Venerate had recovered to his peak, but at the very least, he had regained the strength of a heavenly Venerate and was invincible. They couldn't be compared to their previous dispirited state. Even the clones of the primordial Chaos Sovereign and Heavenly Lord Vast Cloud couldn't compare to them. This was the terrifying power of an Empyrean. However, it was impossible for there to be no benefits from this. In just a short period of time, he felt that his cultivation had been pushed to the limit, and under such extreme circumstances, his strength had increased continuously. He originally thought that it was impossible for him to improve his skills, but he actually improved again and became a little stronger. His understanding of the great Tao also improved. In that instant between life and death, he understood many principles which would be of great benefit to him when he transcended the tribulation. However, the consequences were severe. If it had been anyone else, they would have died instantly. Even the Battle of the Arch was no exception. It was no wonder that the Battle of the Arch, who was an experienced person, had to show respect to Emperor God Rue. It was because he had the powerful space-time heavenly sovereign behind him. Imperial lords were seriously too weak compared to Empyreans. Yishuan examined his time magic robe. It was the main force that had withstood this finger attack. Numerous cracks had appeared on his time magic robe. Although it wasn't as bad as the time when Emperor Primordius had pierced through it, it was still very terrifying. One had to know that when he fought with the other imperial emperors, they couldn't even harm a hair on his body. They simply couldn't be mentioned in the same breath. He heard the discussions of the surrounding sovereign emperors and quasi-emperors. They seemed to be shocked that he could create a miracle. Some people even thought that heavenly venerables were just SOSO. Although they didn't dare to say that they could kill sovereign emperors, they could escape with their lives. Yishuan couldn't help but sneer. One would never know how dreadful a heavenly master was if they hadn't personally fought against one. They would have been a dead man by the time they realized it. This fight was extremely beneficial to him. A martial emperor is really powerful. I can't help but gasp in amazement. Emperor Li hurriedly stepped forward and spoke with a sincere expression, and his words were spoken from the bottom of his heart. It was simply like a miracle. He didn't use his full strength. Otherwise, I wouldn't be so relaxed. No one knew better than him what had happened a moment ago. Pantheon hadn't taken him seriously after all. He hadn't used any magical power or martial arts technique. He had simply pointed his finger at Yishuan. That's still very powerful, Emperor Li said. He was keenly aware of the meaning in Yishuan's words. He hadn't used his full strength. That was why Yishuan was so relaxed. On the other hand, even if he had used his full strength, Yishuan could have escaped, but it wouldn't have been so easy. If it was before, he would have thought that Yishuan was bragging. But now he didn't think so. Yishuan indeed had such qualifications and strength. Emperor Li only stayed beside Yishuan for a while, and then he rushed out again. He didn't dare to kill his way out of the great formation of good fortune like Yishuan did. However, he was only inside. With the protection of the great formation of good fortune, it was enough for him to kill his way in and out. The foreign armies that were near the great formation of good fortune were no match for him. Yishuan could feel that many people's eyes fell on him. The scene just now must have shocked many people. They couldn't imagine that an emperor could really do this. But he didn't care. He just sat cross-legged and began to raise his martial power to repair the robe of time. When the robe of time was broken, he had to look for fragments of the law of time everywhere to repair it. It could be said that he had gone through a lot of hardships. But this time was different. Firstly, the damage was not as serious as the last time. Secondly, his martial power was incomparable to the last time. His understanding of the law of time had reached the pinnacle. It could even be said that his martial power back then was less than 1% of what it was now. At this time, with his understanding of the law of time, it was naturally very easy for him to repair the robe of time. Moreover, it didn't take long. It only took him a few days to completely repair the robe of time. There was even a faint trend of improvement. While repairing the robe of time, his understanding of the law of time had improved. There was a faint feeling of transformation. It seemed that he was about to explore a higher level of the law of time. It could be said that he had gained a great harvest. As for the spiritual chi consumed, it was nothing since he had an incomplete king-level dragon's vein with him. In these few days, the situation of the entire battlefield didn't change. It was just like before. It was almost like it had fallen into a meat grinder. There were deaths and injuries everywhere. The endless battles made even experts like divine kings and quasi-emperors unable to withstand it. They had no choice but to take turns and go to the rear to recuperate. Only an imperial emperor who had merged with the world and could borrow the spiritual chi of the world at any time and place could completely withstand it. As far as the eye could see, there was killing everywhere. In fact, other than the main plane, like the divine capital of creation, the battlefield also spread across the various dimensional planes. In the divine capital of creation, it seemed like a capital city, but in fact there were countless layers of dimensional planes inside. Even the imperial emperors couldn't count the number of planes. Now that they were broken through one by one, the killing had already seeped into them. Even the great formation of creation couldn't protect them all. This was because no one usually thought that someone would attack the divine capital of creation. Therefore, many people built their cave residences in the dimensional planes, just around the divine capital of creation. Now, it had become the main battlefield. Blood flowed like rivers everywhere. Tao soldiers were fighting and experts were everywhere. As far as the eye could see, it was like the scene of the end of the world. It was terrifying to look at. Although Yishuan had mainly been repairing the robe of time in these few days, he would still send 3,000 clones to kill into the foreign army from time to time. He had gained a lot. In these few days, Yishuan's main body didn't move. Correspondingly, Pantheon didn't move again. It was as if the last time he moved, it was only to deal with Yishuan, who had gone on a killing spree. This made him feel helpless. Being targeted by a heavenly venerable was like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. However, the development of the situation made him feel as if he couldn't see through it. A few days had passed, but the Fortune God dynasty's backup force that was rumored to be able to launch a counterattack had yet to appear. Although the Fortune Divine dynasty's territory was unimaginably large, there were also many transmission arrays scattered throughout the Fortune Divine dynasty. Although the Fortune Divine dynasty's territory looked vast, as long as one was willing to spend enough resources, one could appear anywhere in a day. Even if they were caught unprepared at the beginning, the army should have been reorganized after a few days. Even if it took time for the army to mobilize and couldn't appear immediately, some elite troops and top experts could already appear on the periphery of the Fortune God dynasty's battlefield. However, there were no reinforcements. Space-time Heavenly Venerables and the 4 Heavenly Venerables were in closed-door cultivation in the Fortune God dynasty and couldn't come out. However, the Fortune God dynasty didn't only have 1 or 2 Heavenly Venerables. The Super Sects and the top 10 clans also had Heavenly Venerables guarding them. However, they didn't see any reinforcements. This in itself was unreasonable. What kind of inside story was there that they didn't know about? Moreover, although the foreign armies seemed to be attacking fiercely and the battle situation was incomparably tragic, in reality, they did not use their full strength. Although it was due to the existence of the primordial creation formation, it was unreasonable to say that they could not even break a corner of the primordial creation formation. This time, the foreign armies must have come prepared. However, they didn't make any big movements, nor did they try to break through the great origin formation of good fortune. Even Pan Tian Tianzuan only attacked once that day. It was as if he was confident that he wouldn't be outflanked, so he didn't need to be impatient. Another terrifying thought emerged in Yishuan's mind. Could it be that the super sects and the top 10 clans of the Fortune God dynasty have collectively betrayed the Fortune God dynasty? Although he knew that it wasn't very likely, even the slightest possibility was enough to make a chill run down his spine. If this was true, then the situation in the Fortune God dynasty could be said to be turned upside down. Damn it, I still don't have enough information. I must find a way to cross the tribulation. The situation seems to be getting more and more chaotic. I must step into the heavenly venerable realm to break out of this situation. Yishuan clenched his fists. Yishuan walked to the top of the city wall and was about to fly into the air to join the battle. Suddenly, an incomparably terrifying coercion came crashing down. However, it wasn't directed at Yishuan. Instead, it was directed at the good fortune immemorial formation that they were in. Yishuan's expression became dignified. This coercion surpassed that of a sovereign emperor. He finally realized that after a few days of delay, the foreign army was finally going to take action. It was no longer like a few days ago when they were working without putting in any effort. Chapter 33:47. The foundation of the Fortune God dynasty could be said to be deep and boundless. But the outer domain had been able to compete with the Fortune God dynasty for so many years, and even a long time ago, they were the only masters of the Fortune realm. Their foundation was also unfathomable. One or two ethnic groups might not be able to see this, but when the scope was expanded to the entire outer domain, it was very significant. Now, Yishuan felt that the real foundation of the outer domain was about to appear, and he was afraid that this chaos origin formation of good fortune would not be able to protect it. Although he was very confident in the chaos origin formation of good fortune, he was also very clear that this was only a part of it. Usually, it was considered to be impregnable, but it did not mean that it was truly invincible. Since the outer domain had made a move, they must be confident. Yishuan hurriedly transmitted a message to Emperor Li, telling him to quickly leave this area. Otherwise, once they were affected, the consequences would be unimaginable. Martial Emperor, what about you? Quickly go. Emperor Li said quickly, and as he spoke, he passed on the message. The highest commander in this area of the chaos origin formation of good fortune was naturally Yishuan. Therefore, although many people were a little puzzled by the sudden retreat, they still followed the instructions. I'm fine, don't worry about me. A crazy thought flashed in Yishuan's mind, and he had another idea. And at this time, finally, the outer domain made a move. Like a landslide, like a tsunami, a violent force came crashing down. Immediately after, Yishuan felt an incomparably terrifying energy sweeping over. This energy was filled with blood, and it collided with the chaos origin formation of good fortune. Rumble! The entire chaos origin formation of good fortune began to shake violently, and the space began to become unstable. Some of the Fortune God dynasty's experts who tried to tear through the space to escape were directly crushed into powder by the vibrating space. Even though they had received Yishuan's notice, there were several million soldiers gathered in this area. How could it be so easy to notify all of them? On top of that, some of them reacted a beat too slowly. This resulted in more than half of the Fortune God dynasty's army not being able to escape before the earth-shattering attack landed. They were severely affected. At this moment, even those who didn't believe it had no choice but to believe it. They hurriedly retreated in the direction of the second city wall. Since the Fortune Divine dynasty was so big, it was impossible for it to have only one section of the city wall. Layers of defense extended deep into the Fortune Divine dynasty, but it was not visible during normal times. After many years, this place had even become a residential area. And this was just the beginning. The blood-red tide had only just begun. Then, a huge blood-red drumstick fell from the sky and smashed into the primordial creation array. In an instant, it was as if thousands of waves had been stirred up. The entire primeval creation array began to violently tremble. The earth quaked and the mountains swayed as if it was the end of the world. What is this drumstick? How could it be so terrifying? Yishuin couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. He was well aware of the power of the primordial creation array. An Emperor Lord's attack could only set off a small ripple. Even his attack was no exception. It only caused a slightly larger ripple. Even a Heavenly Venerable's attack would not be able to shake the primordial creation array. Otherwise, with Pantheon's character, he would have already attacked without holding back. The primordial creation array would have already been broken. Since ancient times, there was no record of the primordial creation array being broken. Only individual array formations had been broken. But in those records, there was no record of a Heavenly Venerable being able to do this. In that case, what exactly was this gigantic drumstick? Yishuin couldn't help but be shocked. It was simply too terrifying. Just this blood-red drumstick alone was enough to annihilate the millions of Fortune Divine Dynasty's elites gathered here. What kind of terrifying power was this? In other parts of the primordial good fortune array, everyone also felt the violent collision this time. It was too terrifying. Many people looked over and were dumbfounded. So this was the true trump card that the outer domain had prepared. This time, the outer domain had not come completely unprepared. The truly amazing thing was here. It was too terrifying. The primordial creation array, which was originally as solid as a rock and hadn't wavered even after being attacked by millions of foreign troops, had actually started to crack. What is that blood-red drumstick? Damn, what is this thing? How is it so fierce? That looks a little familiar. I think I've seen it in some ancient book. That's the drumstick of the blood-red war drum. In another area, the Battle Emperor was dumbfounded as he revealed the origin of this drumstick. For others, many things might be classified as extremely secretive. But for an old monster like him, who had once followed the Fortune God Emperor to war, there weren't many things in the world that he didn't know. But it was precisely because of the origin of this drumstick that he was so shocked. No way. That's actually the blood-red war drum. Wasn't the blood-red war drum rumored to have been broken by the Fortune God Emperor? Oh my God, how could such a thing still exist? Soon, more and more people recalled the origin of this blood-red drumstick. It was part of a magic tool called the blood-red war drum. A long time ago, the entire Fortune realm was still very turbulent. At that time, there was an invincible existence who possessed this blood-red war drum. With this war drum, he could greatly enhance the strength of his army. In that era, he was a great enemy of the Fortune God Emperor. Later on, in a great battle, that invincible existence was defeated by the Fortune God Emperor and died. Even the blood-red war drum was broken by the Fortune God Emperor with one palm strike, and the blood-red drumstick was nowhere to be found. This was recorded in the ancient records of the Fortune God dynasty. Many people had seen it, but they only treated it as a strange story and didn't take it seriously. They didn't even know what exactly happened in that battle, let alone the blood-red war drum. However, when the blood-colored drumstick reappeared, many people gasped. Needless to say, it was unimaginably powerful since it was a magic item that could be used by the Fortune Creation Heavenly Lord's archenemy. Everyone was talking about what was recorded in the ancient records, but only the Battle Emperor knew that it wasn't just a legend, but a real thing. He had also participated in that battle. The strength of the Fortune God Emperor's old enemy was terrifyingly tyrannical. He also had an invincible army under his command, and with the help of the blood-red war drum, he could fight against 10 enemies at once. It was very difficult to deal with him. That battle was earth-shattering and earth-shattering. In that era, emperors were even more worthless than they were now, and they were even more powerful than they were now. They had truly climbed out of a pile of corpses. A large number of experts died in the hands of the blood-red war drum. Even the Fortune God Emperor, who hadn't reached the Great Tao yet, found it very difficult to fight against it. The blood-red war drum could increase the strength of his army, and at the same time, it could also increase his own strength. Everything seemed so difficult. When he recalled that battle now, he felt that it was a nightmare. In order to encircle and defeat this great enemy, not only did many emperors die, but many heavenly venerables also fell. After fighting for a long time, Fortune Creation Heavenly Monarch finally found an opportunity to shatter the blood-colored war drum with a single palm strike. Without the blood-colored war drum's amplification, Fortune Creation Heavenly Monarch finally defeated this archenemy. After that battle, the Fortune God Emperor finally got rid of an unparalleled great enemy, but he also had to recuperate for thousands of years before he could finally catch his breath. For the old people who had participated in that battle, it was really a huge nightmare. Now that they saw this blood-red drumstick, it was as if the nightmare had come back. That blood-red drumstick disappeared without a trace after that battle, and even the Fortune God Emperor couldn't track its whereabouts. I didn't expect that it would be found by someone for the outer domain, the Battle Emperor said. Of course, he understood what this blood-red drumstick meant when it appeared on the battlefield. It was simply a great killing weapon. If the Fortune Chaos Origin Array was a defensive, great killing weapon, then this blood-red drumstick was an offensive, great killing weapon, a great killing weapon that could change the course of a battle. If it weren't for the Fortune Divine Capital and the Fortune Chaos Origin Array, the millions of Fortune God Dynasty's elites would have been wiped out in an instant if they had encountered this blood-red drumstick in the wild. They wouldn't have had the slightest chance of turning the tables. Even if a heavenly venerable encountered this blood-red drumstick, they would only be able to protect themselves, and it would be very difficult for them to resist it. Originally, he was also wondering why the Foreign Domain's army didn't make any big movements even though they had clearly come to attack. This didn't seem like their style of doing things, and it was even more ridiculous to say that they were only there to scare them. Only now did he realize that they had been preparing this great killing weapon in the past few days. Needless to say, this blood-red drumstick was powerful, but it wasn't easy to activate it. Even a heavenly venerable wouldn't be able to activate it by himself. However, he also knew that with the appearance of this great killing weapon, the war between the two sides would likely escalate. Now that things had come to this, they wouldn't rest until one side was dead, and their real trump cards would be revealed. The Fortune God Dynasty also had a hidden trump card that they hadn't used yet. In the secondary plane in the depths of the Fortune Divine Capital, a sinister smile appeared on Emperor God Rui's face. The Foreign Domain finally made their move. Martial Emperor, let's see if you can survive this time. Ha 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 ha. Chapter 3348. Although the outer domain had mobilized the blood-colored drumsticks, Emperor God Rui was not worried. The primordial formation of good fortune was extremely powerful. Even if the blood-colored war drum was in perfect condition, it would be impossible for it to break the primordial formation of good fortune, let alone the blood-colored drumsticks. Unless the unparalleled ominous star who possessed the blood-colored war drum was present, it would be impossible to break the primordial good fortune grand array with a blood-colored war drum in hand, because the true master of the primordial good fortune grand array, Heavenly Monarch Good Fortune, was not present. This could only be considered a small fight after countless years. The Fortune Heavenly Lord was able to defeat its master back then, let alone now. Emperor God Rui naturally did not take it to heart. At most, he would suffer heavy losses. In his opinion, those elites and top-notch experts who had died were just a bunch of numbers. Back when the space-time Heavenly Venerate had been in charge of the Central Region, he had also assisted the space-time Heavenly Venerate in his rise to power. It could be said that he had absolute authority. In his opinion, these casualties were just a bunch of numbers. It was nothing at all. Moreover, with the foundation and strength of the Fortune God Dynasty, this kind of loss was not even considered a serious injury. Moreover, with the ability of the outer domain, activating the blood-colored war drum would require countless resources and experience. This was also the reason why there had been no major movements in the outer domain over the past few days. Just like how the Fortune God dynasty had to activate the primordial formation of good fortune in advance. Apart from the peerless heroes of the past, who else could activate these ancient relics at will? The only thing he cared about was whether Yi Shiwen would die. If Yi Shiwen died, these sacrifices would be worth it. As for the rest, it was not within his consideration at all. In fact, it was even insignificant. Pass down the order, let the martial emperors hold their positions, and cover the retreat of the main force. They are not to retreat without reason. Emperor God Rui's face revealed a sinister expression. This order was clearly to kill Yi Shiwen. As for whether Yi Shiwen would agree to it, that was another matter. If he disobeyed, wouldn't there be a reason to deal with him? Emperor God Rui naturally had his own plans. In terms of strength, he might not be as strong as Yi Shiwen, but he had the Fortune God dynasty and the time-space heavenly lord behind him. This was his greatest advantage. How could he not know how to use it? Apart from him, almost everyone else was also paying attention to that area. Boom! The blood-red drumstick slammed down again, bringing with it a monstrous momentum and incomparable terror. It directly smashed into the good fortune immemorial array, causing the entire array to tremble violently. Many of the elite troops calmed down and retreated one by one. Seeing that this place was about to be breached, they had no choice but to retreat. Fortunately, their usual strict training worked. After the initial chaos, they had completely calmed down. The many Sovereign Emperor experts also tried to repair the good fortune chaos origin array. They didn't think that they could repair it by themselves. They just wanted to buy time. However, it was obvious that all of this was in vain. They were only slightly swept by the aftershock of the collision between the creation chaos formation and the blood-red drumsticks. Yet it shook them to the point their vital blood roiled, and they almost fell from the sky. This was because most of the attack was absorbed by the good fortune chaos origin array. Otherwise, they would have been seriously injured by the blood-red drumsticks or even killed on the spot. At this time, the decree issued by Emperor God Rui in the name of the Fortune God dynasty reached Yi Shiwen's hands. Yi Shiwen took a quick glance at it and understood its meaning. He immediately sneered. Flames rose from his hands and burned the decree to ashes. This Emperor God Rui really had a good plan. He wanted Yi Shiwen to stay here and die. If it was in the past, Yi Shiwen would have asked him to scram as far as possible. Asking him to stay here and die because of the so-called Fortune God dynasty was simply wishful thinking. Even someone as loyal as the Battle Emperor to the Fortune God dynasty would not accept such an outrageous request. Where did this Emperor God Rui get his confidence from? Did he think that Yi Shiwen would just sit here and wait for death? In an instant, Yi Shiwen completely understood Emperor God Rui's plan. Emperor God Rui must be planning to settle the score after the fall. After repelling the invasion of the foreign creatures, Emperor God Rui would punish Yi Shiwen for disobeying orders and causing the army to suffer heavy casualties. Although this reason must be very laughable in the eyes of outsiders, it could not even be considered a reason. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that. But sometimes, only a reason was needed. Even a groundless crime was fine, let alone a reasonable punishment. Emperor God Rui was undoubtedly joking if he wanted to punish Yi Shiwen. But if Space-Time Heavenly Lord was involved, everything would be a different matter. This was a supreme existence that hadn't been around for long, but he had already become the master of the final central region. Even though he hadn't become a Middle Empyrean in the end, his own strength was enough to show a thing or two. In the blink of an eye, Yi Shiwen had deduced 100% of Emperor God Rui's plan. As for whether Space-Time Heavenly Lord would support Emperor God Rui, there was no need to think too much about it. On one side was his own people, and on the other side was an unknown guy. He would definitely side with his own people. This was also human nature. It seemed that Yi Shiwen was doomed no matter what. But he was not worried, because Emperor God Rui had his own plans. But so did Yi Shiwen. The reason why he did not leave until now was to cover the retreat of the main army to the second line of defense. More importantly, he planned to use this opportunity to leave. Originally, before he came to the divine capital of fortune, he did not feel that it was too urgent. After all, it would only be a few days. But now, the situation was getting more and more chaotic, and he could no longer control it. So he decided to leave for the time being. He would return after passing the heaven's retribution. At that time, Emperor God Rui would know how wrong his plan was. Plotting against a heavenly lord was courting death. This was a provocation to the entire group of heavenly lords, just like how many heavenly lords had tacitly agreed to Pantheon Venerable's massacre. It was fine for a heavenly lord to challenge a heavenly lord, but it was a huge crime for an emperor lord to challenge a heavenly lord. He was well aware of this, because he had also violated this rule. When East, West, Spacetime, Heavenly Lord, and the others came out of seclusion, he would definitely face oppression if he did not enter the Heavenly Lord realm. But he was confident that once he entered the Heavenly Lord realm, there would be no suppression. Even if there were still Heavenly Lords who would suppress him, it would not be a collective action, because there was no need for that. After all, Yishuan would be one of their own by then. Yishuan finally decided to pass the heaven's retribution. It was inevitable that he was excited. Although he was forced to pass the heaven's retribution under the circumstances, it was not rushed in terms of preparation. He had prepared for many years to pass the heaven's retribution. Originally, he could have passed the heaven's retribution long ago, but he did not because he had many concerns. He was not ready to pass the heaven's retribution without suffering any injuries. The heaven's retribution was only a part of this heaven's retribution. He had to maintain his strength as much as possible in order to deal with the various heaven's retribution. And now he was ready. Originally, it would be difficult for him to find an excuse to leave. Now, he could use the moment when the great array was broken to break out of the encirclement. This was his only chance. There was Pantheon Lord and the army of creatures from the alien domain. Judging from Pantheon Lord's previous actions, he would not hesitate to attack if he was exposed in front of him. Therefore, he did not have many chances. He could only escape when the great array was broken and the violent shock wave swept everything. Because of the existence of Emperor God Rui, the divine realm of creation was no longer safe for him. Therefore, he could only choose to pass the heaven's retribution outside. He had no other choice. He had been waiting for this moment. Suddenly, the heavens and the earth rumbled and shattered. The enormous blood-red drumstick had finally smashed into the chaos origin formation of good fortune. The formation that had been maintained for a very, very long time finally couldn't hold on any longer, and it was directly smashed into pieces. A terrifying energy storm was formed. As the huge array was smashed, the terrifying energy storm that was originally contained in the array spread out. For a moment, the earth shook and the mountains swayed. Space cracked. Wherever the blood-colored drumstick passed, a huge black crack appeared. That was a crack in space. Primal chaos poured out from it. A terrifying tide swept out in all directions. Although they had started to retreat long ago, they knew that this area could not be defended when they saw the blood-colored drumstick. However, only a small portion of them could retreat because there were too many soldiers here. As for the path of retreat, even though they had opened up a lot, it was still limited. In order to ensure that they would not be ambushed, the second line of defense was always open. At this moment, under the situation where the army of the alien domain could rush in at any time, it was even more impossible to open it. For a moment, countless soldiers and elites were all turned into a rain of blood under the impact of the shock wave. Soon, a sea of blood was formed. There was not even a scream, because there was no time to scream. From the Tao-confirming realm to the Divine King, from the Divine King to the Quasi-Emperor, they were all equally weak in the face of this terrifying frenzy. Only the Emperor realm could barely protect themselves. Yishuan, who was in the middle of the tide, also felt the astral wind blowing on his face. The wind made his cheeks hurt, and his clothes fluttered in the wind. After he dodged the gigantic blood-colored drumstick, he was like a reef amidst the raging waves, unshakable by anyone. He was still waiting for this tide to continue to spread out. Just as Yishuan expected, This frenzied tide swept out. Not only did it turn a large number of elites in the Fortune Divine capital into a rain of blood, but even the surrounding foreign armies were no exception. Although the higher-ups of the foreign domains had already ordered them to retreat, there were too many foreign creatures besieging the Great Formation. It was impossible to withdraw all of them. This time, it became a rain of blood that filled the sky, and the opportunity that Yi Shiwen had been waiting for finally arrived. Go! Chapter 33:49. Yi Shiwen's figure turned into a beam of light. He stepped on this blood wave and flew out along with the shock wave. Originally, the primordial good fortune array had stored a lot of energy. Because of this, when it exploded, the raging waves that swept out were still terrifying. It was like a raging tsunami, and it swept in all directions. It left a bloody mist wherever it passed. Yi Shiwen was swept away by this raging tide and flew towards the outside. Because everyone was shocked by the terror of this attack, no one noticed that someone had sneaked out. Even Celestial Venerable Pan didn't notice. This was because his gaze was completely on the divine capital of creation. Destroying a portion of the great array of creation had only opened up a hole. If he wanted to truly break through this primordious grand array, it would take a great deal of time. It wasn't something that could be rushed. This shockwave swept into the depths of the alien army before finally dissipating. At this moment, everyone discovered that there was an additional person among them. Someone is hiding inside. Many people had already reacted, but it was already too late. This figure was like a bolt of lightning, rushing towards the periphery of the battlefield. The sovereign emperors who tried to stop him were either unable to keep up with his speed or were sent flying with a single palm strike. They were either instantly killed or heavily injured. That person's strength had reached a terrifying level. Even many experts seemed to be frightened at this moment, and none of them dared to come forward to stop him. Unless he was tired of living, no one would dare to stop such a super malefic star. This allowed Yi Shiwen to gain a little more time. With his speed, he could cross millions of miles in a single step. It wasn't a big deal. However, there were layers of matrix arrays and enchantments everywhere in this battle formation. These had greatly delayed Yi Shiwen's advancement. Otherwise, Yi Shiwen would have been able to get away from this huge battle formation in the blink of an eye with the strength of his legs. However, Yi Shiwen's actions still attracted the attention of Pan Tian Tian. Pan Tian 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 was on the other side of the battle formation, but he still noticed Yi Shiwen's presence immediately. He immediately recognized this figure, but it was none other than the guy he couldn't kill with a few fingers. It could be said that Luo Yunyang had escaped from his hands time and time again. Although he had seriously injured Luo Yunyang back in the Pan Heavenly Palace, Luo Yunyang had still managed to escape. Later on, after Luo Yunyang had regained his heavenly venerate strength, Luo Yunyang had attacked Luo Yunyang several times, but had still failed to kill Luo Yunyang. Last time, he was able to severely injure him, but this time, he didn't even manage to injure him. Instead, he retreated without any injuries. For Yi Shiwen, it was undoubtedly a miracle in the history of the Emperor Realm. It could be said that it was Wu Shang's glory. In fact, his name might even go down in history. But to him, this also meant that he would become the foil of this matter and go down in history. Although no one would doubt his strength, because of this, they would only think that he had failed because he had underestimated his opponent. But to him, this was already a great humiliation. For cultivators of their level, their pride was also very important. Thinking of this, he finally attacked in anger. His hand suddenly slammed down, and in an instant, it turned into a heavenly screen that slammed down. This big hand sealed the world in an instant. It seemed as if it had instantly formed a cage between the world and Yi Shiwen, and firmly grasped him within it. Yi Shiwen naturally knew how powerful it was. Previously, he was able to escape from the Pantheon Sovereign unscathed. Speaking of it, it was because the Pantheon Sovereign didn't take him seriously. Otherwise, even if he could escape, he wouldn't be unscathed. So even now, he didn't dare to underestimate the power of the Pantheon Sovereign. Behind Yi Shiwen, the demon wings were completely unfolded. They were also as huge clouds. With a flap, wind, clouds, thunder, and lightning exploded simultaneously. It was extremely terrifying, and the speed was also extremely fast. When a speed was accelerated to a certain extent, the power of the body would be very terrifying. Although the Pantheon Sovereign had changed the rules around him and turned the space around him into a cage, he still rushed out with his speed and powerful body. Boom! The Pantheon Sovereign's big hand was extremely huge. It could be said that it had almost enveloped the entire area within a radius of tens of thousands of miles. If Yi Shiwen was trapped in it, it would be impossible for him to escape with his speed. But now it was completely different. After directly breaking through this invisible cage, Yi Shiwen's speed suddenly increased a lot. With one step, he directly crossed millions of miles and instantly escaped the pursuit of the Pantheon Sovereign's big hand. He directly left this battlefield. However, Yi Shiwen didn't dare to relax at all because the Pantheon Sovereign's big hand followed closely behind and slammed down. It seemed that it wouldn't give up until it killed him. Yi Shiwen's speed was very fast, but the speed of the Pantheon Sovereign's big hand was even slower. It directly penetrated through time and space, ignoring the distance of millions of miles, and launched a surprise attack on him. The speed of both sides soared to the extreme. Looking from afar, it seemed that Yi Shiwen was flashing. In just a moment, he had already disappeared millions of miles, and the big hand of the Pantheon Sovereign was also continuously pressing down. Because the speed was too fast, the big hand behind the big hand had already slammed down before the first big hand had even disappeared. This caused it to look like a row of big hands had appeared at the same time from afar. This kind of scenery was truly spectacular when one looked at it. However, in fact, for Yi Shiwen, this was simply a life and death escape. He knew that once he appeared, he would inevitably face the surprise attack of the Pantheon Sovereign. If it wasn't for the frenzy tide that had deceived everyone and allowed him to charge more than half of the way, he probably wouldn't have been able to break free. Yi Shiwen's speed was getting faster and faster. The Time Law emitted 7-colored light on his body. This was the extreme use of the Time Law. Only in this way could it be possible to escape the pursuit of the Pantheon Sovereign. In just a short period of time, he had already escaped hundreds of millions of miles away. He had completely escaped out of the range of the divine capital of creation. Finally, the Pantheon Sovereign behind him didn't continue to pursue him. It seemed that in comparison, it was more important to continue besieging the divine capital of creation and break through it. Compared to this, fate seemed to be nothing. Yi Shiwen finally breathed a sigh of relief because he knew that he had successfully left the divine capital of creation. As long as he left the divine capital of creation, the following matters would be simple. After a few breaths, Yi Shiwen's martial power, which had been consumed by the Pantheon Sovereign's pursuit, and some of the minor injuries he had suffered, had almost recovered. At this moment, his state and martial power were at their peak. It was the best time for him to transcend the tribulation. Yi Shiwen immediately didn't hesitate and hurriedly flew towards the endless stars of the heavens beyond the heavens. The closer the stars to the divine capital of creation, the richer the vitality. There were many living creatures on the stars, and some cultivators also liked to build their cave residences in this area. But the higher he flew, the weaker the vitality became, leaving only endless deathly stillness. This was the place where many cultivators liked to transcend the tribulation. Because there were no living creatures here, and it was far away from the divine capital of creation, they didn't have to worry about accidentally injuring themselves when they transcended the tribulation. They also didn't have to worry about being tainted with evil karma. It was the same for Yi Shiwen. After entering an empty and deathly silent starry sky, Yi Shiwen sat cross-legged in it. He faintly seemed like the sole ruler of the entire universe, the sole creator. He had already completely integrated his cultivation with heaven and earth. Looking at him, it seemed like the will of heaven and earth had manifested. Soon, the coercion of heaven's will above his head became more and more intense. This was a sign that he had finally triggered the heavenly tribulation. Almost instantly, heaven and earth sensed his existence, as if it had been provoked, and the increasingly intense coercion gradually formed. Almost at the same time, not only this part of the starry sky, but even the living creatures in the starry sky near the divine capital of creation also felt this heavenly tribulation. In fact, they had never felt this heavenly tribulation being so close to them. Such a strong heavenly tribulation was like the wrath of heaven. Then, this heavenly tribulation gradually spread into the divine capital of creation. Ordinary living creatures only felt that an inexplicable heavenly tribulation was forming, but to those cultivators, this feeling was too familiar. It was obvious that someone was transcending a tribulation, but they also felt a shiver down their spine. Their bodies were trembling, and chills ran down their spines, because they simply couldn't believe what kind of heavenly tribulation could create such a shocking scene. The heavenly tribulation was so far away, but the heavenly tribulation formed a heavenly tribulation that could reach them. What kind of terrifying tribulation was this? Who was transcending a tribulation? What kind of tribulation was this? Ordinary cultivators only felt that this was an incomparably terrifying heavenly tribulation, but they couldn't distinguish it at all. Only those emperor monarchs, upon sensing it, immediately realized that this heavenly tribulation was 100 times more terrifying than the emperor monarch tribulation they had faced in the past. This was something they couldn't be clearer about. When they had transcended the emperor monarch heavenly tribulation, they had already faced a lot of difficulties. But this heavenly tribulation was 100 times more terrifying than the emperor monarch heavenly tribulation they had faced in the past. This was something they couldn't be clearer about. Someone was transcending a heavenly tribulation. Thinking of this, many people's eyes lit up. The heavenly tribulation only spread for a short period of time and soon dissipated, but it was still noticed by many experts. They flew away from the divine capital of creation, heading towards the depths of the starry sky. Chapter 3350. Many powerhouses felt the coercion of Yi Shiwen's divine retribution. Although this coercion soon dispersed, it was enough for many people to feel it. In particular, they guessed that someone might be crossing the heavenly Lord tribulation, which attracted many people's attention. The Fortune God dynasty was extremely vast. No matter where Yi Shiwen was crossing the tribulation, it was naturally impossible to alarm everyone. However, even if only a portion of the powerhouses were alarmed, it was still a considerable number. In addition, some of the powerhouses spread the news by word of mouth, so naturally, there were many more. However, Yi Shiwen was different. Because of his existence, many people had always been paying attention to this matter. Even the heaven-devouring demon king was quiet and cautious when he went to the endless starry sky to cross the tribulation. However, he was different. When he escaped from the hands of Pantheon Tianzuan, he caused a huge commotion. Countless people saw the gigantic palm imprints in the sky. It was as if the sky was going to collapse from the imprints. Naturally, it was impossible to not be noticed by people who were paying attention to such an eye-catching scene. Ever since Yi Shiwen made a name for himself as the strongest person below the heavenly Lord realm, many people had been paying attention to him. Although everyone was secretive about his strength, everyone also understood one thing. He had truly reached the peak of the Emperor realm. Otherwise, it would be impossible to kill the heaven-devouring demon king, who was an Emperor realm emperor, even if he used any means. Therefore, it was only a matter of time before he would cross the tribulation. After all, he was already much stronger than ordinary peak Emperor realm emperors. There was no question of whether he would cross the tribulation or not. Unless Yi Shiwen was as timid as a mouse and did not dare to attract the heavenly Lord tribulation, it would be possible for him to drag it on. However, with his extremely bold character, how could he be as timid as a mouse? This was impossible. Therefore, as soon as Yi Shiwen came out, he immediately attracted the attention of many people. In addition, He went deep into the starry sky. So many people immediately understood his plan. It was not difficult to guess. Is he finally going to cross the tribulation? Ha ha ha. It's finally happening. I didn't expect him to choose this time to cross the tribulation. Many people suddenly opened their eyes. Someone was crossing the heavenly Lord tribulation. For the person undergoing the tribulation, it was undoubtedly a life-or-death disaster. However, for others, it might be a carnival. Since ancient times, it was not uncommon for someone to fail the tribulation, only to end up being divided up by others. Many figures flew into the starry space from various places of the Fortune Divine dynasty. As for the siege of the Fortune Divine capital, they didn't seem to care about it at all. A tyrannical aura rose from the ground and flew towards the depths of the starry sky. However, Yishuan didn't have the time to care about this at this time. The tribulation clouds were gradually forming in the sky, and the dreadful heavenly might was getting more and more intense. It was as if a frightening existence was staring at him, exerting a great pressure on his body and mind, nailing him to the ground. He felt as if he couldn't move at all. The tribulation cloud was finally formed. It stretched for tens of millions of miles, and it almost locked Yi Shiwen firmly within this range. It didn't give him any opportunity to move. Compared to the seal of Pan Tian Tian, this seal that came from the will of the heavens was much larger and more terrifying. Yi Shiwen immediately felt a great pressure. In the tribulation cloud, all kinds of lightning tribulations were brewing. Some were visible to the naked eye, and some were invisible. He could feel them all. This was truly the most terrifying heavenly tribulation that Yi Shiwen had crossed since ancient times. Compared to this, the heavenly tribulation of the era of the Emperors was simply child's play. All kinds of five elements lightning tribulations, yin and yang lightning tribulations, and all kinds of variations of lightning tribulations transformed into terrible beasts, humanoid powerhouses, and various martial wills. They were born with all kinds of lightning tribulations, and they turned into matchless powerhouses. It seemed as if they could lead troops into the endless distance with just a command. Almost all the heavenly tribulations that Yi Shiwen could foresee, and even some that were only recorded in ancient books, appeared at this time. These terrifying heavenly tribulations all possessed unimaginable power. Ordinary emperors who encountered all kinds of heavenly tribulations would be completely annihilated in just one strike. This was how terrifying it was. It was not something that ordinary people could deal with. However, Yi Shiwen heaved a sigh of relief. Although these terrifying heavenly tribulations were terrifying, in general, they did not exceed his expectations. If he had just entered the ninth realm, he might have encountered a mishap. But now it was not the case. This was the benefit of his hard work and preparation for so many years. Even so, he still felt a little dignified when he saw the endless number of terrifying lightning tribulations. Moreover, he had already sensed the aura of many powerhouses around him. The heavenly tribulation was just one of them. The more terrifying human tribulation had already arrived. They were just waiting for him to reveal his weakest moment. Then, it would be time for these people to attack. Everyone who wanted to enter the Celestial Master Realm had to pass this hurdle eventually. Otherwise, they would not be able to truly rule over all the powerhouses in the world. Many pairs of greedy eyes were staring at Yi Shiwen's silhouette amidst the endless thunder tribulation. Of course, they didn't dare to break into the thunder tribulation without permission. That was because they clearly knew how terrifying it was. Many people even felt a chill down their backs. If they did not personally witness it, they would never understand how terrifying the heavenly tribulation of Celestial Master was. It was no wonder that many emperors who had cultivated to the level of peak emperors still did not dare to trigger the heavenly tribulation of a Celestial Master. It was because this heavenly tribulation was too terrifying. Even among peak emperors, only 1 in 100 could eventually pass the heavenly tribulation and become heavenly monarchs. Originally, only 1 in 100 sovereign emperors could become a peak sovereign emperor. Now, only 1 in 100 sovereign emperors could become a heavenly venerate. This meant that only 1 in 10,000 sovereign emperors could become a heavenly venerate. It was because of this extremely low success rate that celestial masters became the rulers of the world. As there were too few of them, and they were powerful, they naturally became the rulers of the world. Damn, I remember that there are records of the heavenly tribulation of a celestial master in our sect. It is definitely not this terrifying. Isn't that so? I have seen the heavenly tribulation of the heaven-devouring demon emperor before, but it was definitely not half as terrifying as this heavenly tribulation. But this is also normal. The heaven-devouring demon emperor is at most a normal person, but this guy in front of us is a terrifying monster who killed a celestial master. It should be reasonable to give him an even more terrifying heavenly tribulation. Many people were talking about it. In the Fortune Divine dynasty, there were many forces that had a deep foundation and had experienced a long history. Among them, there were also some ancient records that described the heavenly tribulation of a celestial master. Although the records were extremely terrifying in the eyes of these onlookers, it was not even half as terrifying as the heavenly tribulation in front of them. At least there were many kinds of heavenly tribulations that were not mentioned in the ancient records. If it were them, they might not even be able to withstand the first wave of heavenly tribulation and would be completely defeated. This heavenly tribulation was too terrifying. Just as many people were feeling terrified, the heavenly tribulation in the sky finally turned into a violent thunderstorm and rained down. Clatter, clatter, clatter. For a moment, the sky was filled with all kinds of heavenly tribulations. All of them fell, turning the thousands of miles of land into a sea of thunder and lightning. Yi Shiwen was completely submerged in it. The primordial spirits around him were also annihilated in an instant. Under the heavenly tribulation, all kinds of existences would be destroyed. It was impossible for even a trace of them to survive. Everyone began to open their heavenly eyes. With the power of their heavenly eyes, they could barely see Yi Shiwen's figure. However, in the face of this terrifying sea of thunder and lightning, Yi Shiwen stood still and let it wash over him as if he was taking a bath. Each of these thunderbolts was as huge and terrifying as a thunder dragon. But when it fell on Yi Shiwen's body, it was like a drop of water falling on his body, smashing into pieces. To him, these heavenly tribulations were just appetizers. They were just child's play and were not worthy of him making a move. They could not even break through his most basic defense. Although this was already extremely terrifying for ordinary sovereign emperors, a terrifying lightning tribulation that could injure and kill them if they were not careful, the heavenly tribulations were still terrifying. It could be said that a scratch would hurt and a knock would kill. Yi Shiwen did not care at all. He only used his gilded tyrant form to resist. While resisting, he absorbed these heavenly tribulations for his own use. He used these heavenly tribulations to temper his body. Although the effect was quite limited for him now, he still understood the principle of accumulating many a little makes a mickle. Moreover, other than this kind of heavenly tribulation, it was very difficult for other thunder and lightning to stimulate his body. Now, the strength of his body had reached a shocking level. It could be said to be extremely terrifying. He could even fight against Taoist tools with his bare hands and smash Taoist tools into pieces. This had already surpassed the limit of ordinary Taoist tools. After a long time, after the continuous baptism of heavenly tribulation, Yi Shiwen suddenly opened his eyes. In the sky, in addition to those ordinary heavenly tribulations, there were even 5 elements heavenly tribulations that began to fall. Not long ago, 5 elements heavenly tribulations were the most terrifying heavenly tribulations that many people felt that they could not resist at all. At that time, Yi Shiwen also felt that it was very troublesome. The power of the 5 elements alternated and erupted. It was extremely terrifying. However, now, this 5 elements heavenly tribulation was just an appetizer. Behind it were countless terrifying heavenly tribulations. Any one of them was more terrifying than this 5 elements heavenly tribulation. Rumble, five elements, heavenly tribulation mixed the power of the five elements with the wrath of thunder. One after another, it fell directly on Yi Shiwen's body. A sound of metal colliding was heard. Sparks flew everywhere. Chapter 33:51. The five elements' thunder tribulation was getting bigger and bigger. Every one of them was as big as a person. The energy it contained could easily injure an ordinary emperor lord and destroy a world. All of them fell down like a thunderstorm. Every single one of them exploded with terrifying power. Yi Shiwen was no longer indifferent in the face of these five elements' thunder tribulations. On the contrary, he frequently attacked. The area formed by his hands was like an absolute domain. Those five elements' thunder tribulations couldn't fall on Yi Shiwen's body at all. They were all blown up by his palm. The power of the fire attribute, the power of the water attribute, the power of the wood attribute, the power of the earth attribute, the power of the metal attribute, and various types of the five elements' thunder tribulation smashed down. In fact, it wasn't just falling alone. Many of the five elements' thunder tribulation simply formed a large formation and fell. This made the power of the five elements' thunder tribulation to a higher level. However, it seemed to be nothing to Yi Shiwen, who was in the center of the large formation. No matter what fell from the sky, he would blow it up with a punch or a palm. He himself didn't think much of it. Instead, it was the imperial monarchs in the distance who were dumbstruck and trembling with fear. They would have to take one of the five elements' tribulation lightning seriously, let alone they were descending like raindrops. It wasn't something they could resist at all. Under normal circumstances, they could only be blasted to death, and there was no other possibility. However, Yi Shiwen didn't seem to care at all. He just blew it up casually. It was clear to see how powerful he was. The title of the strongest person below the heavenly venerables was not undeserved. Many people even felt that they had underestimated him after seeing this series of attacks. How could someone who could slaughter heavenly venerables not have some skills? Those people who besieged Pantheon venerables previously had already proved that heavenly venerables were not to be trifled with. However, he still provoked them and won in the end. This in itself was a very terrifying sign. He was also the only one in the world who could shit like a scorpion. The more shocked they were, the more ambitious they became. The more this was the case, the more good things Yi Shiwen had on him. The more things they could split, the more things they could get. Of course, the greater the risk. However, in their opinion, those risks were nothing compared to the real benefits. Robbing a heavenly venerate, regardless of whether he succeeded or failed, was not an ordinary situation. It was precisely because this matter was unimaginably risky that many peak sovereign emperors did not dare to trigger a heavenly tribulation. It was simply too dangerous. Once they triggered the heavenly tribulation, they would definitely be well prepared. Even so, the success rate was still quite low, less than 1 in 100. At this time, endless thunder dragons fell along with the five elements thunder tribulation. However, this was just the beginning. It seemed that the heavenly tribulation was also angered. This level of attack couldn't do anything to Yi Shiwen. Then, a terrifying, ominous beast composed of the power of thunder appeared. Many of these beasts that had existed since ancient times had even gone extinct. However, under the summons of the heavenly tribulation, they had been revived once more, and now they were emitting an unprecedented and terrifying power and aura. What kind of terrifying existence was this? It was simply unimaginable. Moreover, so many of them had gathered together to form a torrent of ominous beasts. They rushed towards Yi Shiwen in a mighty manner. The entire world trembled under the onslaught of these ominous beasts. Everywhere they passed, space shattered and time ceased to exist. Each and every one of them was an extremely terrifying existence. In the midst of this heavenly tribulation, Yi Shiwen's expression was grave. However, he did not panic. The sacred mountain directly transformed into 3,000 figures. They were actually 3,000 martial arts incarnations. These 3,000 martial arts incarnations each possessed an unparalleled secret art. They were not inferior to the ominous beasts evolved from the heavenly tribulation. It was only 3,000 martial arts incarnations, but the aura they emitted was not inferior to that of a magnificent army. They possessed an unimaginably shocking might. Boom! Both sides were like two armies that collided violently. From afar, it looked like two shocking torrents had collided with a loud bang. Every single one of them possessed earth-shattering power. Every single one of them could be said to have remarkable abilities and boundless magic power. Whenever Yi Shiwen's martial arts incarnations were destroyed, another would be replenished. It was as if there was no end to them. The endless ominous beasts evolved from the heavenly tribulation were also replenished as soon as they were killed. It was just like how Yi Shiwen wanted to fight against heaven and earth alone. Human strength was limited, but the power of heaven was endless. Using human strength to fight against heaven's power. Even these cultivators who claimed to fight against heaven and seize fate from heaven would try their best not to do so. On the contrary, this was a heavenly tribulation. They had no choice but to fight against heaven. At this time, it was very important to prepare in advance. Almost every moment consumed a huge amount of spiritual energy. If Yi Shiwen had accumulated it previously, it would probably be very strenuous. The longer an Emperor Lord cultivated, not only would it be a waste, but on the contrary, the foundation would continue to accumulate over time. Fortunately, Yi Shiwen had an incomplete king-level dragon vein, so he could choose to fight against it head-on. There was no need to worry at all. As time passed, a full day and night had passed. The collision between these two huge torrents had never disappeared. Yi Shiwen's magic power was still like a monstrous sea, as if it had never been exhausted. Many people felt extremely horrified. With the magic power of an Emperor Lord, fighting for a day and night was naturally nothing. Even fighting for hundreds of years or thousands of years was nothing. However, it also depended on the situation. In this kind of battle, every minute and every second consumed a huge amount of spiritual energy. Every minute and every second had to contend against the endless heavenly retribution. An ordinary sovereign emperor's spiritual power would start to dry up by the end of the day. However, Yi Shiwen didn't seem to show any signs of exhaustion. The magic power in his body had really reached an incredible realm. Although people often said that Emperor Lord's magic power was boundless and remarkable, they also knew that they also had their limits. There was a time when human strength was exhausted. At that time, whether it was the quasi-emperors or the divine kings, they simply could not exhaust their magic power, which created the illusion that their magic power was boundless. At this time, Yi Shiwen's body was extremely vigorous, and there really was a feeling of boundless magic power. There wasn't even the slightest sign of exhaustion. However, many people soon felt relieved. If Yi Shiwen had been defeated here so easily, then he wouldn't have been able to trigger the heavenly tribulation so easily. After all, not many people were willing to do things that they weren't sure of. At this time, Yi Shiwen not only urged 3,000 incarnations to fight, but also personally went to fight. Compared to his 3,000 incarnations, Yi Shiwen's body was even more terrifying. Not only was his strength more terrifying than the 3,000 incarnations, but his physical body was also much more tyrannical than the 3,000 martial arts incarnations. It was not something that ordinary people could imagine. In addition, the 3,000 martial arts incarnations only used one kind of martial arts, and he himself had all kinds of martial arts at his fingertips. These fierce beasts were fierce, but they were not Yi Shiwen's opponent. He could smash them to pieces with just one palm, which was similar to slaughtering those Emperor Lords. It was just that there were few opportunities for Yi Shiwen to use his full strength in the past. But in the face of heavenly tribulation, Yi Shiwen still used his full strength. With Yi Shiwen's body as the arrowhead, although the number of the fierce beasts was far inferior to the number drawn by these heavenly tribulation, under Yi Shiwen's leadership, they were still irresistible and invincible. Soon, the seemingly endless fierce beasts finally came to an end, and they were no longer as endless as before. Slowly, the number of those ominous beasts began to gradually decrease. Finally, when the last ominous beast was killed by Yi Shiwen, 2 days had already passed. In these 2 days, Yi Shiwen continued to kill nonstop, and the most terrifying thing was not Yi Shiwen's infinite spiritual power, but his defensive power. Under this level of siege, ordinary peak Emperor Lords would have been seriously injured and collapsed, or even died, but he seemed to be fine, and he did not care about these things at all. In fact, in the eyes of many people, they did not even scratch the skin of the heavenly tribulation. Obviously, this level of heavenly tribulation was not considered a test for Yi Shiwen. Although Yi Shiwen did not hold back, he still reserved his ultimate move. This level of heavenly tribulation did not require him to use his full strength. He was still waiting for more terrifying things to appear. When the last fierce beast of heavenly tribulation was killed by him, the heavenly tribulation in the sky paused, and then a gust of wind blew. Wherever this wind passed, time, space, and various laws were all gone. After the thunder tribulation, it's time for the 3 disasters. Many people could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Cultivators had always experienced the so-called 3 calamities and 9 tribulations. That was truly the most terrifying because it could not be avoided. Once this kind of wind blew down, it could blow away the flesh and blood of cultivators, leaving only bones. It could be said to be extremely terrifying. Even if they cultivated to the Emperor Lord level, many people still had a lingering fear of the 3 disasters and 9 disasters. And now, Yi Shiwen was obviously going through the strengthened version of the 3 disasters, and it was a wind disaster that could not be guarded against. Sure enough, Yi Shiwen's defense, which could be said to be watertight, actually began to change. The golden light on his body began to fluctuate, like the waves of water, with circles of ripples. Obviously, these astral winds had forced Yi Shiwen to raise his martial power to defend. Unlike before, those heavenly tribulations could not even make Yi Shiwen move. Many Emperor Lords assessed themselves. If it were them, they estimated that their bones and flesh would really be scattered after being blown for a while, and even their spirit would be blown away. Chapter 33:52. The 3 calamities and 9 disasters were getting more and more terrifying. This kind of astral wind was blowing on one's body. One's skin and flesh would be blown away in an instant. Yi Shiwen's protective divine radiance was also constantly swaying in this astral wind. It seemed as if it would be completely annihilated in the next moment. Under such circumstances, Yi Shiwen could only raise the martial power of his entire body and begin to resist. Even Yi Shiwen didn't dare to underestimate this endless astral wind. Otherwise, he might die tragically here. However, this was only the beginning of the wind disaster. Following that, heavenly flames rained down from the sky. All kinds of heavenly flames rained down and connected with the wind disaster. Along with the astral winds, the heavenly flames blew into the bones of the people, almost completely roasting them. This was something that couldn't be avoided. It directly blew into one's body. This was a test of one's body. If one's body wasn't strong enough, then one's bones and flesh would be blown away, and one's spirit would be destroyed. Yi Shiwen took a deep breath. These flames could ignite almost anything. Even his body, which had already reached the Vajra realm, had been ignited. The flames were raging, and from afar, he looked like a man on fire, burning more and more vigorously in the sea of thunder. The bones of his entire body were burning crazily. Yi Shiwen wouldn't have felt anything if it was just like this. In fact, he could even use this as a means of tempering his body. He could use the 3 calamities to eliminate the few impurities in his body. Of course, these impurities were probably priceless treasures in the eyes of others. This was another stage where he would step into a more perfect state. However, this was just the beginning. The mighty lightning army had already appeared in the sky. Yi Shiwen had read about this kind of calamity many times before. He naturally understood that the lightning army was far more terrifying than the lightning fierce beast army. That was because the lightning fierce beast army often acted on instinct. No matter how terrifying their magical instincts were, they could only exert 100% of their power. This was the limit. However, martial arts were different. They could exert 200% or even 300% of their original power. This was the essence of martial arts. Because of this, the Lightning Army was much more terrifying than the Lightning Fierce Beast Army in Yi Shiwen's eyes. Not to mention that he was currently experiencing the 3 calamities and 9 disasters. And they had erupted at the same time. No way. It can't be. They actually burst out at the same time. Hiss. Even the heavens want him to die. Let him defy the heavens. I've only heard of them erupting one at a time. I've never heard of all kinds of tribulations erupting at the same time. Is this Empyrean's heavenly tribulation so terrifying? Of course, not all Empyrean tribulations are so terrifying. Only the one in front of us is so terrifying. Many of the imperial emperors watching from afar felt extremely horrified. This was simply an inconceivable miracle. These tribulations broke out at the same time, and it was simply a great disaster. It was as if the heavens didn't intend to play with him anymore and wanted to completely annihilate him in one go. However, what they didn't know was that the difficulties that Yi Shiwen faced during the heavenly tribulation weren't just a little bit. At the same time, many illusions appeared in front of him. Many of the memories that Yi Shiwen had suppressed at the bottom of his heart suddenly rushed into his mind. There were memories of his previous life on Earth. There were also memories of his time in the true martial world. All of these memories could be mistaken for the real ones. Even Yi Shiwen himself found it difficult to distinguish between the real and the fake ones. Inner demons. This was an inner demon. Yi Shiwen reacted all of a sudden. There was no other thing that could cause such an effect except for the heart devil. Logically speaking, Yi Shiwen had something like the great illuminating lamp that could completely restrain inner demons. Inner demons couldn't even be generated at all. Not to mention, he also had a heavenly treasure like the enlightening mind ancient tree. Even if there was an inner demon, it was impossible to affect him through the enlightening mind ancient tree. Not to mention that his cultivation had reached an unprecedented level. It could be said that his eyes were like torches. It was simply impossible for inner demons to confuse his mind. However, such a terrible thing still happened. Therefore, Yi Shiwen instantly understood that it was the heaven's way that had forcibly triggered the heavenly tribulation. He couldn't help but feel terrified. The heaven's ways means were indeed impressive. It could bypass many of his means and forcibly trigger inner demons in his heart. This itself was unimaginable. However, since it was clear that it was an inner demon, it was already useless. The so-called inner demons couldn't cause any actual impact. They could only confuse one's mind. When one's mind was clear, these inner demons couldn't affect him at all. The eye of heavenly punishment suddenly opened, and those inner demons screamed and turned into ashes in an instant. All those scenes from the past and present, from the past to the present, all turned into nothingness in an instant. At this moment, Yi Shiwen found that the Heaven's Retribution Army had already rushed in front of him. Obviously, they had rushed in front of him when Yi Shiwen was confused by the inner demons just now. However, Yi Shiwen's movements were faster. He raised his hand and blasted out a punch. He directly blasted through a lightning figure that rushed in front of him. This lightning figure still wanted to forcibly recover, but Yi Shiwen completely sealed it with the word seal. Then he absorbed it and turned it into his own strength. The emperor who was watching the battle in the distance was originally very strange. Why didn't Yi Shiwen move at all? It was not until the Heaven's Retribution Army finally rushed in front of Yi Shiwen that he finally reacted. All of them were also battle-hardened, although the horror of this Heaven's Retribution was far beyond their imagination. After all, there were still traces to follow. They immediately understood the reason. He had been struck by the inner demons. Many people only looked from afar and only felt a chill on their backs. In the Heaven's Retribution, the most terrifying thing was not the thunder retribution. On the contrary, it was the inner demons. The visible thunder retribution could be resisted, but the invisible inner demons were the most difficult to resist. If one was not careful, one might fall into the abyss of eternal damnation. Moreover, many of the facts that one originally thought were actually blinded by the inner demons. This point was deeply felt by all cultivators. Once one was struck by the inner demons, the consequences would be unimaginable. Fortunately, Yishuan seemed to have finally awakened from the inner demons. This also disappointed many people who had the same thoughts. Unfortunately, Yishuan did not directly fall into the inner demons. However, Yishuan, who had just awakened, was not much better. He directly fell into the most tragic battle. The Heaven's Retribution army of the Lightning People was far more terrifying than the Lightning Beast army. In particular, he had to deal with the inner demons and the three disasters tribulation fire in his body. There were all kinds of astral winds blowing outside and thunder strikes constantly. He had encountered almost the worst environment. It could even be said that since ancient times, there was probably no celestial master who had such difficulty in crossing the Heaven's Retribution. But it was precisely because of this that he had to fight even more. The current difficulties could save him a lot of time in the future. Moreover, he had no other choice. Once the Heaven's Retribution was triggered, he would either succeed or die. Escaping with serious injuries was only a one-in-a-million situation. A fierce battle quickly broke out. In the face of this menacing attack, even Yishuan's 3,000 incarnations were constantly retreating. The battle became more and more intense. Because his original body was experiencing all kinds of tribulations. In fact, his original body's combat power was also greatly affected. He could not act as the arrowhead and guide the 3,000 incarnations to attack. Although the 3,000 incarnations were incomparably powerful, the Lightning Retribution army was not inferior to them. In fact, they could only be stronger. Under such circumstances, Yishuan also showed some signs of weakness for the first time. He could not be as invincible as before. Although this is terrifying, if you think that's all I can do, then you're underestimating me too much. Yishuan sneered. In his body, the Nanmingli fire began to burn. It was not burning his body, but the Heaven's Retribution fire. He actually wanted to absorb these Heaven's Retribution fire, the strengthened version of the three disasters tribulation fire, and turn them into his own power. In his opinion, it was possible for him to absorb all of these energies that ordinary people would run away from. At the same time, the Mingxin ancient tree was faintly behind him. It firmly fixed the inner demon in place, reducing the influence of the inner demon on him to the lowest. At the same time, the time robe also appeared on the surface of his body, minimizing the influence of the external Heaven's Retribution. Even the influence of the astral wind was minimized. Only then did Yishuan finally start fighting. He rushed into the Lightning Retribution army. Although his combat power could not be restored to 100%, he could still have 80% to 90% of his peak combat power. For him, this was enough. Even if he only had 80 to 90% of his peak strength, he was already very powerful. He was still invincible among the many sovereign emperors. He could kill one or even a few heavenly tribulation lightning men with a casual attack. With the king-level dragon vein as his foundation, he had nothing to fear. He could attack with all his strength and be invincible. Many sovereign emperors could not help but gasp in amazement when they saw Yishuan regaining his combat strength so quickly. From the beginning of the heavenly tribulation until now, the various trump cards and means that Yishuan had continuously displayed were already shocking enough. It was completely beyond the scope of ordinary emperor lords. This was the only way he could attract such a terrifying Heaven's Retribution. However, at this time, more and more people had received the news, and more people were rushing over. Among them, there were more than one or two people who harbored ill intentions towards Yishuan. These people gradually surrounded Yishuan, who was in the midst of the Heaven's Retribution army. Once he showed any signs of weakness, as long as there was a slight opportunity, they would not hesitate to attack and eliminate this person who was famous as the number one person below the Heavenly Master Realm. After all, an Emperor Lord was just an Emperor Lord. Yi Shiwen's situation had also become worse and worse. Chapter 3353. With the arrival of a large number of experts, Yi Shiwen's situation became extremely bad. Although not all of them dared to attack. Even if only some of them attacked, it was enough to pose a fatal threat to Yi Shiwen, who was crossing the retribution. As for the others, they wouldn't mind taking advantage of the situation at the critical moment. It did not matter if it was one or two, but when a number reached a certain level, it would pose a huge impact on him. At this time, Yi Shiwen's retribution was not over yet. These lightning troops were indeed terrifying. They had already destroyed several batches of Yi Shiwen's 3,000 martial arts incarnations. Fortunately, with the king-level dragon vein, Yi Shiwen's spiritual power was not exhausted. On the contrary, the continuous annihilation of the 3,000 martial arts incarnations was also a verification process for him. Every time the team was annihilated, his experience was richer, and his understanding of the Great Way was deeper. It could be said to be a process of continuous learning and hard work. At this time, he was very glad that he robbed the king-level dragon vein. Although it was incomplete, it was still extremely important for him. Otherwise, if he only relied on the level 1 and level 2 dragon veins, he was afraid that it would not take long to exhaust them. At that time, his spiritual power could only be said to be less and less. However, at this time, the heaven's retribution was still endless. Not to mention, there was even more terrifying human retribution. This was just the beginning. But he also knew that this was the most critical time. Once he passed through, he could become the real chess player in the world and dominate the world. If he could not pass through, everything would be over. Boom, boom, boom. All kinds of explosions, continuous. Killing, continuous killing. Yi Shiwen had been killing nonstop for a full 10 days and 10 nights. His fighting prowess was far superior to that of an ordinary sovereign emperor. So, he had been able to persist until now. He hadn't spent a lot of effort to kill those lightning men every time. Perhaps an ordinary peak sovereign emperor would have been finished long ago if he had been in his place. In this kind of heaven's retribution, the most terrible thing was a protracted war. If each of them had to fight for a long time, it would mean that they were courting death. Yi Shiwen had become numb after such a long period of killing. He had been killing for a full 10 days and 10 nights. Then, he finally felt that the lightning troops had significantly reduced in number. Yi Shiwen finally saw the hope of crossing this tribulation. He had been contending with the heart devil, the tribulation fire inside his body, the tribulation wind outside his body, and the tribulation thunder outside his body for 10 days and 10 nights. He gradually came to understand that this heavenly tribulation was a way for the heavens to exterminate the person undergoing tribulation. At the same time, it was also a form of tempering. Each of these abilities was necessary to become an Empyrean in the future. The constant tempering of the heart devils had allowed his state of mind to improve at a frightening speed. Because he had to maintain a clear mind at all times to avoid being taken advantage of by the heart devils, his state of mind had improved the fastest among all the others. 10 days was more effective than 10,000 years of cultivation. Sure enough, no matter what kind of situation one was in, only when one was forced to a dead end would one's potential be completely unleashed. Of course, this was also because of the existence of the enlightening mind ancient tree, the great illuminating lamp, and other divine tools that could restrain the heart's devil. Otherwise, he would have been lost in this heart's devil. So, he wouldn't have been able to refine it for his own use. In addition, his body had also become more and more powerful under the burning of the tribulation fire, the blowing of the tribulation wind, and the strikes of the tribulation thunder. His body had already become extremely perfect. Now, it was undergoing a kind of transformation. This was difficult to achieve in the past, no matter how tyrannical his martial power was, because he hadn't reached that level yet. An Emperor Lord could only use the rules to the extreme. Whether it was the promotion of the realm or the tempering of the body, there was an upper limit, and this upper limit was the limit allowed by the rules. However, an Empyrean was another matter. An Empyrean could change the rules. If the rules allowed the water to boil at a temperature of 100 degrees, then Yi Shiwen could modify the rules so that the water would boil at a temperature of 1,000 degrees. So, 900 degrees was enough to heat the water to a terrifying extent. Only an Empyrean could constantly break through the limits and the peak of the world's martial arts. And the more rules an Empyrean could modify, the more limits he could break through. Therefore, the limits of an Emperor Lord were nothing in the eyes of an Empyrean. In fact, they could even break through to an unimaginable level. At this time, Yi Shiwen had already shown such signs. The limits that couldn't be broken at all had now begun to collapse little by little. He was also becoming stronger, but this feeling hadn't really solidified yet. The heaven's retribution was precisely to force people to change and break through the limits. In Yi Shiwen's own understanding, heaven was giving you an opportunity. If you could grasp it, you could break through. Once you broke through, you would be Empyrean. If you couldn't grasp it, you would die. From his point of view, heaven was very fair. In the endless crisis, it still left a trace of life for people. It wasn't completely certain death. At this time, even a stupid person could see Yi Shiwen's transformation. He was changing. This feeling was similar to the time when they had crossed the Emperor Tribulation. They had transformed from a quasi-emperor to an Emperor Lord. There was only a thin line between them. It was the gap between a celestial being and a human being. This had already made Yi Shiwen surpass most of the peak Emperor Lords who crossed the heaven's retribution since ancient times. Because most of them couldn't even endure this step, it was impossible for them to have that kind of transformation from the inside out. It was also because of this that many people began to be unable to stand still. Some people also understood that if they waited like this, perhaps Yi Shiwen would be able to endure it. He had already begun to transform, which meant that the heaven's retribution had already reached the final stage. Although the final stage might not mean that he could easily pass it, because the closer to the end, the more terrifying the heaven's retribution would be. But some people didn't want to continue waiting like this. While the real heaven's retribution army was still there, a figure directly tore through the layers of heaven's retribution thunder and directly attacked Yi Shiwen. In an instant, he had already arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. And Yi Shiwen, who had been killing, suddenly opened his eyes wide. A ray of cold light flashed in his eyes. In the face of such a sudden attack, he was not surprised. He just sneered and said, "After holding back for so long, is it finally coming?" At this time, he had reached the most critical moment of transformation. He was very clear about this. So he was even more clear that if the opponent was not stupid, this time was undoubtedly the best time for a surprise attack. And because of this, this was the beginning of the most dangerous time for him. Sure enough, someone couldn't help but attack. As he expected, he was not anxious at all. Bang! Yi Shiwen slapped the figure with his palm, and the figure blasted out a punch at the same time, colliding with Yi Shiwen's. The figure was slapped far away by Yi Shiwen's palm, but Yi Shiwen did not take advantage of the victory to pursue an attack, because he was dealing with the remaining Lightning People army that continued to attack. But to Yi Shiwen's surprise, this figure broke into the Heaven's Retribution army, but was not attacked by the Heaven's Retribution army. One must know that the Heaven's Retribution army represented the Heaven's way, and it was the most forbidden to challenge it. Once challenged, one must pay a huge price. But this figure broke into the Heaven's Retribution army and was unexpectedly not attacked by the Heaven's Retribution army, as if he was blind. Although the Thunder Retribution army also fell on him, he was just an innocent bystander. The real main force was on Yi Shiwen's side. Yi Shiwen instantly opened the eye of divine punishment and immediately saw through the identity of this figure. It wasn't a real living person. It was just a puppet. It was a well-made puppet with tyrannical strength to an unimaginable extent. What was even more amazing was that this puppet had undergone special treatment, erasing the karma and concealing the Heaven's way. So, the Heaven's way couldn't see its existence. Yi Shiwen could see its existence because he had subjective consciousness, but the Heaven's way didn't have such subjective consciousness. So, he could only judge it according to common sense. Moreover, after erasing the cause and effect, even if Yishiwen wanted to calculate it later, it would be impossible. As the saying goes, there must be a cause and effect. In other words, the whole thing didn't exist. Since it didn't exist, how could there be any clues? If there were no clues, it would be impossible for Yishiwen to find someone to settle the account later. It's really a big move. They've put in a lot of effort to deal with me. Yishiwen could obviously see that it was very difficult to make this kind of puppet, even for a celestial master. It would consume a lot of resources, and the success rate was very low. Moreover, it was necessary to erase the karma of this matter. Perhaps some very powerful secret techniques would be used. It was unknown how many resources would be needed to make this puppet. Generally speaking, it would be kept in a sect or clan as a treasure to protect the clan. It would only be unsealed when the sect or clan was exterminated. But now, it was released because of Yishiwen. It was no wonder that Yishiwen said that it was really a big move. This must be the work of a celestial master, and it was not an ordinary celestial master. Otherwise, it would be impossible to make such a brave and invincible peak emperor lord-level puppet. It was impossible for such a puppet to defeat Yishiwen, but it would only cause trouble for Yishiwen and cause him to be killed by the heaven's retribution. This was enough. Yishiwen didn't hold back when he made his move just now. Even a peak emperor lord would be seriously injured if he was hit directly. It was unstoppable. However, this puppet was only blasted away for a short distance. It was not damaged at all. It could be seen that the material of this puppet was hard to find. Yishiwen was restrained by the puppet on the outside, and the lightning army was attacking from the inside. It was too difficult to kill this puppet. This was also the most thorny problem that Yishiwen had encountered so far. In fact, even the lightning people's army didn't seem like a big deal to him. Chapter 33:54. The truly troublesome ones were the experts who were watching from the shadows, especially those who dared to directly enter the heavenly tribulation. None of them were ordinary people. Who would dare to attack at this time unless they were a heavenly lord? An ordinary peak-level sovereign lord would be courting death if they dared to rush into this heavenly tribulation. Even a peak-level sovereign lord like the Electric Lord would die without a burial place if he entered Yishiwen's heavenly tribulation. Although many people had the idea of taking advantage of the situation, if they were to risk their lives for the sake of taking advantage of the situation, perhaps 100% of them would not be willing to do so. Which of those heavenly lords did not have any means? Even if they did not directly attack, it was still equally terrifying for Yishiwen. However, this was just the beginning. Fortunately, Yishiwen was most relieved that no heavenly lord directly attacked and killed him. Otherwise, the entire situation would be extremely bad. At that time, on one side was the heavenly tribulation, and on the other side was the heavenly lords attacking at all costs. Perhaps he would also have to flee in a sorry state. However, he knew that the possibility was not high, because if a heavenly lord wanted to interfere with the heavenly tribulation, they would also face the retaliation from the heavenly Tao. This had nothing to do with strength. On the contrary, the stronger the person, the more they wanted to interfere with the operation of the heavenly tribulation, and the more severe the backlash they faced. Therefore, even those emperor lords would rarely interfere with their disciples' heavenly tribulation, because once they did, the level of the heavenly tribulation would increase by a few levels, and they would directly retaliate against them. If that was not the case, those big sects should have many emperor lords guarding them. However, the fact was that no matter what, emperor lords were still a scarce resource. This was also a kind of invisible protection from the heavenly Tao for those who were undergoing the heavenly tribulation. Therefore, it was already considered good for a heavenly lord to do this, unless there was a deep hatred for him. Previously, Yishiwen was prepared to kill the heaven-devouring demon emperor who was undergoing the heavenly tribulation, even if he had to suffer a huge loss. Unfortunately, he did not find the heaven-devouring demon emperor, so he had to take a risk. At this time, Yishiwen did not know whether he should laugh at himself. It seemed that apart from the heaven-devouring demon emperor, he did not have a deep hatred for any heavenly lord. This was also the reason why Yi Shiwen had to kill the heaven-devouring Demon King first. Otherwise, the heaven-devouring Demon King would definitely come and kill him while he was crossing the tribulation. At that time, it would be difficult for Yi Shiwen to escape the calamity. The heaven-devouring demon monarch would at most be severely injured. However, under the combined attack of the heavenly tribulation and the heaven-devouring demon monarch, he would definitely die. This was a human tribulation that was more terrifying than any heavenly tribulation. The real killing had begun. Yi Shiwen had to fight against the three disasters inside and outside his body on one hand. On the other hand, he had to kill the heavenly lightning soldiers and take their power for his own use. On the other hand, he also had to fight against the puppets that would sneak in from time to time. Whether it was the lightning man or the puppets, they didn't have their original will. So, they didn't need to be afraid of getting injured. Each of their moves was deadly, and they were willing to exchange their life for Yi Shiwen's life. They wanted to perish together with Yi Shiwen. Even if they couldn't perish together with Yi Shiwen, they would only suffer serious injuries. Normally, Yi Shiwen would be able to recover in 3 to 5 breaths. However, he had suffered serious injuries now, and there was no doubt that he would die. The heavenly tribulation wouldn't give him any time to recover. The situation was gradually becoming unfavorable for Yi Shiwen. However, even so, Yi Shiwen was still trying his best to kill those lightning men. No matter what kind of strength they had, they seemed to be no match for Yi Shiwen. Just as Yi Shiwen was about to reverse the situation bit by bit, an incomparably loud roar of a beast suddenly came from afar. It was approaching from afar, and in just a moment, it had already arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. Just like the puppets, it directly rushed into the heavenly tribulation without any hesitation. The heavenly tribulation seemed to be blind and couldn't see the owner of this figure at all. Boom! A huge bloody mouth opened, revealing a mouth full of sharp fangs, and suddenly bit towards Yi Shiwen. At the critical moment, Yi Shiwen directly moved thousands of miles away, and only then did he manage to avoid the sudden attack of this bloody mouth. At this time, he finally saw clearly what it was. This was a fierce beast as tall as a mountain. At this time, Yi Shiwen was like an ant in front of a giant in front of it. There was a huge gap between them. This fierce beast carried a kind of monstrous momentum, as if it was the only master of the world, and it wanted to bring the world into the civilization of the beast. It had a kind of domineering momentum in the world. Is it a celestial master? Yi Shiwen frowned slightly because he felt a familiar feeling from this fierce beast. It was the aura of the celestial master realm that he was about to break through. However, he soon discovered that although this fierce beast carried the aura of a celestial master, it actually didn't have the terrifying power of a celestial master. It could only be regarded as an empty shell. However, even if it could only be regarded as an empty shell, it was much more terrifying than the primordial Chaos Emperor's spirit incarnation previously. It could almost be compared to him. For an emperor, it was something that was impossible at all. However, for a celestial master, they could modify the rules. Everything in the world was possible. No, it's just a remnant thought. Yi Shiwen opened his heavenly eye and quickly saw what this fierce beast was. This was because this was not a celestial master at all. Or rather, it was a former celestial master. After being defeated and killed, only this remnant thought was left behind. It was taken away and refined into a spirit puppet using a secret method. Although it didn't have the means and ability of a celestial master, it could be said to be invincible in the Emperor realm. Yi Shiwen could feel that this power was almost on par with his own, and this was already very incredible. Although this is just a remnant thought of a celestial master, there are very few celestial masters. Moreover, after being killed, there must be a strong unwillingness to leave this remnant thought for refining. Even if the sky-devouring Demon King was killed by it, there would not be such a strong remnant thought left behind. It can be said to be a priceless treasure. It's really an honor to use it to kill me. There is a sneer on Yi Shiwen's face because he found that the karma of this remnant thought had also been cut off. He could only trace back some information about this remnant thought. It was impossible to deduce the person controlling it from behind the scenes. Of course, he understood the thoughts of these celestial masters. They were also wily old foxes. In order to deal with Yi Shiwen, they would personally go into battle. In the end, they would be seriously injured and have to recuperate for hundreds of thousands or millions of years. However, they didn't dare to believe that there was another chess player in the world. So, they simply used such a trump card to kill Yi Shiwen. It would be good if they succeeded, but if they failed, they wouldn't have to be enemies with a future celestial master for a long time. Obstructing someone from achieving enlightenment was a deeper hatred than killing one's parents and cutting off one's path to wealth. It was enough to confront them until the end of time. However, knowing this was one thing, Yi Shiwen still had to face the attacks from both the ferocious beast and the puppets. In particular, this remnant thought of the ferocious beast could almost be compared to Yi Shiwen. Moreover, it had stimulated all of its potential. It didn't need to care about the long term. The combat power that it could erupt in a short period of time was indeed extremely terrifying. Moreover, there was also the Lightning People Legion. They were rushing towards Yi Shiwen without any regard for their lives. The three-way encirclement had almost forced Yi Shiwen into a dead end. Yi Shiwen was a little overwhelmed, even though he had prepared a lot beforehand. And at this time, another master made a move. Obviously, he didn't want to see Yi Shiwen succeed and become one of the chess players. A door shining with a halo opened in the sky. Then, an arm wearing an ancient costume stretched out from it. Then, a treasured saber appeared in his hand. This treasured saber instantly erupted with a terrifying saber light. It went straight to the sky and almost dispersed the tribulation clouds. Then, this treasured saber slashed down towards Yi Shiwen at lightning speed. Yi Shiwen instantly felt an extremely dangerous aura enveloping him. That blade light seemed slow, but was actually very fast. In the eyes of an outsider, it seemed as if it was simply falling down. However, in his eyes, it had fallen on his body in the next moment. Bang! The saber light fell on his body fiercely. A loud roar sounded. The saber light slashed into Yi Shiwen's body. It was like a saber slashing into a boundless sea, setting off stormy waves. Yi Shiwen was slashed and sent flying. Dense cracks appeared on his body. Blood constantly flowed out from the cracks. He's injured. He's actually injured. Many people couldn't help but exclaim. Until now, they didn't find anything strange about what they said. It was very normal for an Emperor Lord to be injured during the Heavenly Master Tribulation. However, Yi Shiwen's performance was too strong. From the beginning of the tribulation, whether it was the boundless sea of thunder and lightning at the beginning, or the 5 elements thunder tribulation later, the 3 calamities and 9 disasters, the lightning beast army, the lightning man army, and even the puppets and the remnant thoughts of the beasts, these dangers were enough to scare many Emperor Lords to death. In the face of these dangers, not to mention being forced into a desperate situation, he didn't even get injured. In the eyes of many people, according to this rhythm, it seemed possible for Yi Shiwen to pass the tribulation without any injuries. In this case, not only would he pass the Heavenly Master Tribulation, which was rarely seen since ancient and modern times, but he would also create a record of passing the tribulation without any injuries. However, now this legend was directly shattered. An arm came out of nowhere and slashed at Yi Shiwen, causing dense cracks to appear all over his body. Could it be that a Heavenly Master personally took action? Many people couldn't help but widen their eyes. This was the only way that this unimaginably tyrannical monster could be seriously injured. It's not a Heavenly Master. If it was a Heavenly Master, no matter how hard he tried to hide, it would cause a rebound from the Heavenly Master Tribulation. He was injured mainly because he couldn't suppress the tribulation fire in his body and suffered a backlash. There are many reasons added together. Someone saw clearly and quickly said. Chapter 33:55. It was already the end. Everyone knew that although there was still a boundless sea of thunder and the 3 disasters and 9 disasters, it was indeed the final moment. In their opinion, the appearance of that old man had sealed Yi Shiwen's last hope. Such a terrifying existence could almost fight against Yi Shiwen at his peak. In fact, he might even be stronger than Yi Shiwen at his peak. But they had no idea that the most terrifying part of the death zone in their eyes was the only way for Yi Shiwen to level up and also the biggest chance of survival. The others could not be defeated in a short time, and even if they were defeated, it would not affect the overall situation, so Yi Shiwen quickly gave up on them. 3,000 martial arts, Yi Shiwen shouted, and 3,000 martial arts split from his body, divided into 3 waves, and directly flew towards the puppets, the fierce beast remnant soul, and the big hand holding the blade. They blocked the 3 of them. Although the 3,000 martial Daos were unable to pose a fatal threat to the 3 of them, it was enough to delay them for a period of time. Yi Shiwen himself flew out in an instant, and went in the direction of the old man with the spear. Behind Yi Shiwen, all kinds of martial arts almost turned into all kinds of strange phenomena. In order to fight for the last chance of survival, he also went all out and did not hold back in the slightest. However, there was not the slightest change on his face, and he still looked indifferent and calm, as if he was taking a stroll in his own back garden. But his hand did not give way at all, and a universe creation palm burst out. This was his most powerful move, and with the support of the Eye of Sky Punishment, its power was increased by a level. Just this palm alone burned a level 3 dragon vein of Yi Shiwen. It could almost be said that Yi Shiwen's palm had smashed all the foundation of a big sect. Bang! Yi Shiwen's palm was fast and urgent, as if it was wrapped in the power of heaven and earth. The old man with the spear wanted to take the initiative to attack, but obviously there was no other way. It was too late, and he could only passively counterattack. Clang! He raised his spear, and Yi Shiwen's palm collided. With a loud explosion, sparks flew in all directions. The spear-wielding old man retreated a few steps before he finally managed to stop. In Yi Shiwen's competition, this was the first time that he had fallen into a complete disadvantage. However, this was just the beginning. Yi Shiwen once again used the Good Fortune Universe Palm. This time, it was even more terrifying than before. It directly burned away the spiritual energy of a level 2 dragon vein. The old man had just stabilized his footing when Yi Shiwen had already pounced towards him. Yi Shiwen hadn't even stabilized his footing yet because he wasn't prepared at all. Not to mention, Yi Shiwen had suddenly increased his strength, which had left him completely unprepared. Moreover, he had used the same strength as the last time they had fought. So, he had suddenly suffered a loss. Because he didn't know that the power of Yi Shiwen's universe creation palm had a great relationship with the number of dragon veins he injected. The more dragon veins he injected, the stronger the power. Bang! This time, not only was he blasted back a step, but he flew out completely. Like a meteor, he flew directly into the tribulation clouds and directly smashed a huge hole in the tribulation clouds. Yi Shiwen was even more relentless. He rushed up and directly chased into the tribulation clouds. The tribulation clouds seemed to be enraged. They began to madly strike down the thunderstorm, as if they were going to beat Yi Shiwen to death. However, Yi Shiwen didn't care at all at this time. He clenched his teeth and used all his strength. Another Good Fortune Universe Palm fell. This time, it was even more straightforward. It directly burned a level 1 dragon vein. Although it was only an increase of 1 level, in terms of attack power, it was more than doubled. It was almost an increase of several times, and his combat power instantly soared. It couldn't be calculated with ordinary logic. Bang! This time, Yi Shiwen directly slapped down with a backhand palm. It landed heavily on the body of the old man with the spear. This time, the old man with the spear couldn't even react. The strength of the old man with the spear had also reached the peak of the Emperor Lord. He could compete with Yi Shiwen at his peak, but that didn't include the situation where Yi Shiwen increased his combat power with the Good Fortune Universe Palm. This was obviously beyond the limit. The old man's body exploded on the spot. There was no blood, but at the moment of the explosion, Yi Shiwen clearly saw a martial arts imprint at the core. It was this martial arts imprint that was summoned by the heavenly way. However, in the next moment, the old man was reorganized as if he wasn't injured at all. All the losses were made up by the heavenly way in an instant. This was also the most terrifying thing about the old man with the spear. He was immortal and had infinite spiritual power. Compared to when he was alive, he was more terrifying and more difficult to deal with. However, since Yi Shiwen had already seen that martial imprint, he knew how to deal with that old man. Although his body was immortal and his magic power was boundless, but his martial imprint was unique and the most fragile. As long as his martial imprint was broken, then no matter how tyrannical he would still die in the end. What is this move? Why is it so terrifying? In the distance, the Emperor Lords felt that their bodies were trembling. When Yi Shiwen used the Good Fortune Universe Palm, his already top-notch combat power increased by several levels. It looked even more terrifying, and they felt a chill down their spine. He actually hit his strength. This should be his true peak combat power. Someone said in a daze. It seemed that they couldn't accept that Yi Shiwen's strength was so tyrannical. With such terrifying strength, if it were them, they might not even be able to withstand this palm. However, they could also see that the price of this palm was not small. Otherwise, with Yi Shiwen's situation, he would have used it long ago. If that was the case, the heavenly retribution would have ended much earlier. It's really sad. Even now, these juniors don't know the famous consummate skill of the Good Fortune Heaven Lord. A soft sigh was mixed among these people, but no one knew it. This kid is a bit interesting. The Good Fortune Universe Palm has been lost for so many years. Even the Good Fortune God Dynasty didn't have any records of it. Where did he get it? While everyone was discussing, Yi Shiwen's fourth palm strike had already landed. It was still at the cost of a level 1 dragon vein. The old man with the spear was sent flying on the spot. At the moment when his body was about to shatter, the old man with the spear was sent flying. Countless sword lights appeared above Yi Shiwen's head and condensed in the sky. Then, they turned into a terrifying sword technique and fiercely slashed down, directly blasting the martial arts imprint on the spot. Bang! There was a loud roar. Even though Yi Shiwen had destroyed his body, there was no trace of pain on the face of the old man with the spear. Unexpectedly, an extremely painful expression appeared on his face. Obviously, Yi Shiwen had hit his vital point and found his weak point. Sure enough, when Yi Shiwen used the same trick again, a huge crack appeared on the martial arts imprint. At the same time, the light it emitted was a lot dimmer. This seemingly immortal existence also had a weakness. As long as he caught hold of it, he would be toyed within the palm of Yi Shiwen's hand. It seemed easy, but it was not something that ordinary Emperor Lords could do. The most simple point was that they could not find a martial arts secret skill like the Good Fortune Universe Palm. Even if they reached the Emperor Lord realm, they could still improve their strength without any side effects. Even if there was, it was impossible for them to be as rich as Yi Shiwen. One palm could destroy all the foundation of a big sect, which was enough to make everyone despair. If one wasn't truly wealthy, how many people would be able to afford it? In terms of Emperor Lords, apart from Yi Shiwen, there was no one else. Not only was he the strongest Emperor Lord, but he was also the richest Emperor Lord. If it was just a celestial master, then it was another matter. It could be said that although it seemed nothing, this was something that belonged to Yi Shiwen alone, and only he could do it. He was the only one who could cross this heaven's retribution. As for the others, one would die. But to be honest, if it was someone else, there was no need to cross such a terrifying heaven's retribution. The old man with the spear was very strong. His reaction was very fast, and his realm was even more ridiculously high. However, his own strength limited his performance. Although the heaven's retribution was terrifying, it was only a heaven's retribution. It could not have any power that far exceeded his own strength to test him. And this aspect was Yi Shiwen's strength, so he finally grasped this opportunity. Bang! 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 Yishuan launched heavy attacks. Every time his palm smashed the curtain of rain formed by the thunderstorm, a large part of the sky collapsed. On the other side, whether it was the puppets, the ferocious beast's remnant thoughts, or the big hand holding the saber, they all seemed to know that Yishuan had reached a critical moment. Naturally, they refused to let go of this critical moment and began to kill crazily. Yishuan's 3,000 martial arts incarnations seemed strong and numerous, but they could not stop 3 crazy existences. Moreover, they did not need to worry about getting hurt or anything. As long as they could complete the task, it seemed that everything was worth it. All of a sudden, the 3,000 martial arts incarnations that Yishuan released became fewer and fewer, and Yishuan, who was fighting fiercely, had no time to split out more martial arts incarnations. Time was also getting tighter and tighter, and it all depended on which side succeeded first. Yishuan knew this, so he gritted his teeth and persevered. Even though the surging spiritual power almost drowned everything, he still persevered. He did not know how many times he had attacked, and the martial arts imprint was already densely packed with cracks. Final blow. Yishuan roared and slapped the martial arts imprint with his palm. Bang! The martial arts imprint suddenly shattered. As the martial arts imprint shattered, he could feel that the heavens' retribution was finally over. Chapter 33:56. Everyone could clearly see that although that blade was terrifying, it wasn't unsolvable. The reason why Yishuan couldn't withstand it and his body had collapsed was because of the tribulation fire inside his body and the many attacks he had received before. All of them had erupted together. Because Yishuan didn't have time to completely expel these forces, he was in a fierce battle almost all the time. So at this time, all the remaining forces concentrated and erupted. That saber was like a primer, exposing all the hidden dangers in Yishuan's body. Many people looked at each other because the legend of a possible unscathed heavenly tribulation was broken in front of them. But even so, no one would think that it was because Yishuan was too weak. Yishuan's strength was the most terrifying one they had ever seen, especially those ancient emperor lords. In fact, they had seen more than one heavenly master crossing the heavenly tribulation. In fact, more than one peak emperor lord had tried to cross the heavenly tribulation but failed. However, none of them could compare with Yishuan. If his heavenly tribulation was just an ordinary heavenly master's heavenly tribulation, perhaps he would really survive unscathed. This was already terrifying enough. From the beginning until now, perhaps no one really thought that he could not survive heavenly tribulation. But now everything had changed. Yishuan, who was injured, was naturally not that terrifying. Perhaps he might not survive heavenly tribulation. This was exactly what they had hoped for. However, seeing Yishuan crossing the tribulation in an incomparably strong manner, they faintly had another kind of expectation in their hearts. That was, if Yishuan succeeded, would they witness a miracle? Even if they couldn't divide the things of super powerhouses who failed to survive heavenly tribulation, witnessing a miracle would also be of great benefit to them. During heavenly tribulation, they could only see the complex heavenly way information belonging to heavenly masters that couldn't be seen when they were emperor lords. Not to mention anything else, just watching the battle was enough for many people to obtain huge benefits. Not all of these people came with evil intentions. Many weak emperor lords were also very clear that their strength was not enough to take advantage of the situation. The premise of the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind, was that the oriole had to be more powerful than the mantis. If this praying mantis was extremely terrifying, the oriole would probably be eaten instead. Moreover, even if the mantis died, there were so many orioles around. The probability of them succeeding was not too high. The final distribution would only be carried out among the top few. They had no chance at all. Therefore, if possible, witnessing a miracle was also a good harvest. For ordinary people, they were already existences that constantly created miracles. But in reality, for them, there were also legendary existences. Evidently, this human martial emperor was creating a miracle. Many of his surrounding sovereign emperors thought of many questions. However, Yi Shiwen, who had been blasted away, felt a little better. Although he had lost a lot of blood, some of the tribulation fire had been expelled at the same time. This made him feel a lot better. The injuries on his body weren't that serious, because his recovery ability was quite powerful. In just a short while, he had already recovered to about 70 to 80%. However, he knew that the most brutal battle had already begun. He didn't know who the three parties that had intervened were, but he knew that they should be experts at the Heavenly Master level or above. The saber light descended from the sky and slashed towards him almost at the same time. Yi Shiwen was not given the slightest chance to breathe, but at this time, Yi Shiwen was already on guard. Naturally, it was impossible for him to be chopped by the saber. The devil wings on his back suddenly stretched out and completely surrounded him. Clang! A loud roar was heard, and it exploded on the spot. The violent storm that swept out almost destroyed everything. The aftermath of the battle between the two sides was already terrifying enough. It was far beyond what the Emperor Lords could imagine. At this moment, the murderous remnant consciousness and the puppet man pounced on them almost instantly. Along with them were the heavenly lightning troops. It was as though there was no end to them. Boom! 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 After the fierce battle paused for a moment, it broke out again. The two sides fought from the sky to the ground, from one end of the Milky Way to the other end. Wherever they passed, even if it was a long Milky Way, it would be reduced to ashes by this terrifying power. Fortunately, there wasn't much vitality in the nearby galaxy, and there weren't many stars themselves. Otherwise, they would have been destroyed. Even though Yi Shiwen had broken through the stipulated range of the Heaven's Retribution, the Heaven's Retribution above his head followed him like a shadow and never stopped. After another 3 days and 3 nights of fierce battle, Yi Shiwen finally destroyed the last heavenly lightning troop with the intervention of the 3 heavenly masters. Because he was very clear that the Heaven's Retribution was the most crucial. The other 3 could at most interfere with his retribution. Even if he tried his best to fight them to the death, it wouldn't be beneficial to his retribution. On the contrary, as long as the Heaven's Retribution was passed, all of these were nothing. They were all in the bag and had to die. He was still clear about this point. However, even if he killed the last heavenly lightning troop, he didn't relax at all. Because he knew that the real terrifying test was about to begin. Compared with this final test, the previous ones were nothing. If he was at his peak, he might not be afraid. But now, because of the tribulation fire, tribulation wind, tribulation thunder, and the interference of the other heavenly masters, he might not even be able to exert 50% or 60% of his power. Whoosh! Yi Shiwen only saw a black crack suddenly torn in the space in front of him. The end of the crack was none other than the depths of the Heaven's Retribution. Something jumped out from the depths of the Heaven's Retribution, but the speed was so fast that it even shattered the space. Yi Shiwen just raised his hand to block it. Suddenly, he felt that the power of the universe was borrowed and added to this attack. Thump, thump, thump. Yi Shiwen retreated again and again. He retreated thousands of miles in an instant. Every step he took left a thick footprint in the air. In his body, he felt that his chi and blood were churning, and there was a terrifying power surging in his body. Whoosh! Another saber light slashed from the side. It was the treasured saber that had seized the most critical moment and made its move. The big hand that wielded the treasured saber had the power to destroy the world. Although Yi Shiwen wasn't afraid, he didn't want to take this attack head-on at this time. Yi Shiwen immediately spread his demon wings, and his figure instantly moved tens of thousands of miles horizontally, avoiding the attack range of this saber. However, at this moment, the fierce beast seemed to have been prepared for this. It opened its bloody mouth and bit towards Yi Shiwen. Get lost! Yi Shiwen slapped his palm. Under the blessing of the eye of heaven punishment, the energy of the whole world seemed to condense. In an instant, it poured into his hand like a torrent. He slapped the fierce beast and sent it flying. Yi Shiwen's entire arm almost sank into the beast's body when he slapped it. This fierce beast was tyrannical, but it didn't have a physical body after all. In such a contest, it immediately fell into a disadvantageous position. However, it was also because it didn't have a physical body that it was very difficult to deal with. It wasn't like ordinary creatures, where a physical injury was equivalent to a serious injury. After slapping this fierce beast away in one fell swoop, Yi Shiwen moved tens of thousands of miles horizontally. At this time, the place where he had been standing a moment ago had been swept by a spear light. It had completely turned into chaos, and not even a fragment had been left. It had all evaporated. Such a method was really terrifying to the extreme. Yi Shiwen finally saw clearly what this figure was at this time. It was an old man with an extremely thin figure. However, he was carrying an iron spear that was taller than him in his hand. This iron spear was extremely terrifying. Almost everywhere the tip of the spear had passed, the space would turn into chaos. Time and laws were simply meaningless. Yi Shiwen knew that this was the most terrifying and last resort of the heavens' retribution. This didn't seem like the ordinary heavenly soldiers and fierce beasts that were condensed from lightning. This was like the resurrection of an unparalleled ancient powerhouse. Super ancient powerhouse. Yi Shiwen's eyes suddenly flashed with a sharp light because he seemed to have understood what this was. Perhaps this was the imprint of a super powerhouse who had fallen in the past. And this imprint had been summoned by the heavens. And this imprint had resurrected a matchless super powerhouse. Although his strength was no longer comparable to when he was at his peak, in terms of realm, there was no doubt that he was a super powerhouse among the heavenly venerables. Compared to the sense of oppression that this old man gave him, the heaven-devouring Demon King was much worse. The heaven-devouring Demon King's suppression was purely due to his strength, but this old man's suppression was in terms of realm and life rating. It was completely different. This should be the first time that he had fought with a heavenly venerate under similar circumstances. He didn't have the realm of a heavenly venerate, but his strength was far beyond that of an ordinary emperor lord. The old man in front of him had the realm of a heavenly venerate, but didn't have the strength of a heavenly venerate. This was also an extremely rare opportunity for Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen's eyes lit up because he had already thought of a way. The situation in front of him seemed to be a dead end, but it wasn't necessarily a dead end. There was still a glimmer of hope. And this glimmer of hope lay in the body of this spear-wielding old man who had just appeared, but was also the strongest among them. Although he was the strongest link, he was also the biggest weakness. This was because the heaven's retribution would end as long as he was killed. Chapter 33:57. With the end of the heavenly tribulation, Yi Shiwen felt that the power that had been suppressing him had disappeared without a trace. His martial power and realm, which had been firmly suppressed, were now gushing out like a tide. He only felt that he was transforming and becoming a stronger realm, which was the supreme ruler, the heavenly lord. He could already sense the difference in himself, and even faintly felt the biggest difference between a heavenly lord and an emperor. That was the modification of the laws. This was like playing a computer game. The emperor was the top expert. His micro-operation was superb, and he could make use of all the rules that could be used to the extreme. He could be called a top expert. On the other hand, Sky Sovereign had used a cheat. He had changed the rules. For example, humans couldn't jump through walls, but players with a cheat could. Players in the game could only jump once, but players with a cheat could jump 3 times. No matter what kind of expert they were, there was nothing they could do when facing such cheats. Unless they also had cheats, they could only passively take a beating. This was the difference between an emperor and a heavenly lord. And the gap between Empyreans could roughly be understood as the gap between a small cheat and a big one. The reason why the heaven-devouring demon monarch had been killed by Yi Shiwen previously was not because Yi Shiwen's own ability was better than the cheat, but because he had found another heavenly master to write a cheat. The cheat broke the cheat. Without the cheat, the heaven-devouring demon monarch could only fight against Yi Shiwen within its own rules, which was why he had been killed. Even though the heaven-devouring demon emperor was considered to be at the top, he was not invincible without the cheat. He survived the heavenly tribulation. Some sovereign emperors couldn't help but say in disbelief. They didn't expect that Yi Shiwen would use his tyrannical strength to break out of the hopeless situation that they thought was a dead end. He was really tyrannical without limit. That's right. Although some of the tribulation clouds have not dissipated, the will of the heavenly way has dissipated. What's left is purely the energy of thunder. An emperor quickly reacted. Although the tribulation clouds were a part of the heavenly tribulation, the most important thing was that the heavenly tribulation contained the will of the heavenly Tao. Otherwise, how could a naturally formed lightning energy make these extremely powerful peak sovereign lords so miserable? After crossing the heavens' retribution, Yi Shiwen formed a big hand and grabbed the tribulation clouds in the sky. Then, the tribulation clouds were completely transformed into the essence of thunder and lightning. Then, he refined them into 36 heavenly thunder beads. Although they were only refined using the remnant energy of the tribulation clouds, their might was not small. If he were to casually throw one of these beads, an ordinary Emperor Realm expert would be blown up and seriously injured. If he were to throw 2 more beads, that Emperor Realm expert would really die. Given his strength, he would not be able to use it. However, if he left it to the human race, it would be another trump card. Furthermore, it did not require any harsh conditions to activate. A quasi-emperor would be able to activate it and detonate the heavenly thunder within it, causing an earth-shattering might to erupt. Although it could only be used at the most critical moment, it was still better than nothing. Yi Shiwen felt that he was transforming faster and faster, as if he was about to transform into a heavenly lord. This trend was a certain process, but he could feel that he was becoming stronger and stronger. At this time, the 3 people had completely cleaned up Yi Shiwen's 3,000 martial arts incarnations. All of them rushed towards Yi Shiwen in an attempt to be the first. The first to arrive was the puppet. Relying on the fact that its body was made of special materials, it was not afraid at all. It did not give Yi Shiwen any chance to take a breather and flew over in one breath. He blasted out a punch. It was unknown which fist technique it was, but an extremely bright light erupted from his hand. It almost covered half of the starry sky. After the heavenly tribulation was gone, it was even more unscrupulous when it attacked. It did not need to worry about causing a backlash from the heavenly tribulation. Yi Shiwen just glanced at the puppet indifferently and also threw a backhand punch. 6 paths of reincarnation fist. It was just a simple punch, but it was as if the cycle of reincarnation between heaven and earth had been grasped in his hand, and he had completely unleashed it. The puppet just let out a strange cry, and then its body flew out completely. Its body flew upside down in midair, and then it directly fell apart. The materials that made up its body collapsed, and the runes attached to its body also turned into powder. In front of Yi Shiwen's sharp means, this puppet was nothing at all. Everyone was dumbfounded because everyone had clearly seen the strength of this puppet before. It could be said to be extremely powerful. Although it was slightly at a disadvantage when fighting with Yi Shiwen, it did not show an absolute disadvantage. However, it was destroyed by Yi Shiwen's blow. Everyone couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spines because this didn't mean that the puppet had become weaker, because it had never changed. In that case, the person who changed was Yi Shiwen. He had become stronger. He was already scary enough, but now he had obviously crossed the boundary and was transforming into a heavenly lord. The transformation had not been completed yet, but it was already scary enough. He could easily defeat an opponent that could not be defeated at all. This was a clear proof. Many people felt as if they had finally seen a miracle, a complete miracle. No one expected that Yi Shiwen would eventually overcome it. Although there were many dangers in the middle, Yi Shiwen had finally overcome it. Moreover, he had overcome it in such a way, forcefully overcoming the heavenly retribution. He was transforming. He was becoming stronger. After defeating the puppet, Yi Shiwen just grabbed the puppet in his hand. Although most of it had been damaged, there was still a part that could be used, and it might be restored in the future. It was difficult to make a talisman that could erase the cause and effect, but it was much easier to restore the combat power of this puppet. As long as he was given some time, he would have a chance. At that time, it would also mean that among the human clan, there would be one more supermaster at the level of Yi Shiwen before he had crossed the heavenly retribution. Yi Shiwen had originally believed that he was the most unique and unrivaled expert, but the emergence of these three experts had also made Yi Shiwen's original belief that he was the most unique and unrivaled expert. It was indeed very rare to see someone who could naturally cultivate to his level. However, it didn't mean that the heavenly masters couldn't create one. Whoosh! Yi Shiwen took a step forward, and his whole body instantly disappeared into the void. When he reappeared, he was already in front of the remnant soul of the vicious beast. It was still in a sprinting posture. Yi Shiwen just stretched out his big hand and suddenly slapped it, directly piercing the remnant soul of the vicious beast. The vicious beast screamed and struggled in Yi Shiwen's hand. Eventually, it turned into a cloud of green smoke and disappeared without a trace. It was not a match for Yi Shiwen at present. His strength was still transforming, and he was still becoming stronger. His eyes finally fell on the big hand that was holding the blade. Just as he was about to destroy the blade-wielding hand, a flame suddenly surged out from the darkness that had been suppressed in the deepest part of his body. It turned into a sea of fire that filled the sky. In an instant, it completely swept out. It directly wrapped Yi Shiwen. Looking from afar, he looked like a man on fire. Such a change suddenly shocked everyone. They did not expect that there would be such a change after crossing the heavenly retribution. Could it be that the original tribulation fire was not cleared out? Many people were extremely puzzled. At this time, a stern voice sounded in Yi Shiwen's ear. I didn't expect you to be able to reach this step. Just nice. I'll take over your body. Become my puppet. In Yi Shiwen's body, the figure of the divine flame, heavenly venerate, was condensing and turning into flames. This was to completely burn Yi Shiwen's spirit to death, and then occupy Yi Shiwen's body. Yi Shiwen sneered. Although he was surrounded by endless flames, he did not panic at all. He had already expected this situation. The fire seed that the divine flame, heavenly venerate, had left in his body had not been cleared. In other words, Yi Shiwen had simply suppressed it and did not kill it. This was because he did not want to stimulate the divine flame, heavenly venerate, out of his closed-door cultivation. It was possible to deal with the heaven-devouring demon king, but he was not confident that he could deal with the divine flame, heavenly venerate. Now, he was not afraid at all. He reached into his body with one hand and grabbed the flame-shaped spirit of the divine flame, heavenly venerate. The spirit of the divine flame, heavenly venerate, had not expected Yi Shiwen to be so strong at this time. In his estimation, Yi Shiwen should be at his weakest when he was undergoing transformation. How could he be so strong? However, he had miscalculated in the end. Yi Shiwen was far from being comparable to the heavenly venerates he knew in the past. Even though he had just crossed the heavenly venerate tribulation, he did not fall into a weak period. On the contrary, he was still at his strongest in history. This was something he had never expected, because even the heaven-devouring demon king had a weak period. Someone had taken advantage of it and seriously injured him. The divine flame, heavenly venerate, had not expected things to turn out like this. He did not even have time to scream before he was crushed into a cloud of green smoke by Yi Shiwen's palm. After destroying the spirit of the divine flame, heavenly venerate, Yi Shiwen's transformation speed became even faster. It was almost unstoppable. At this moment, the big hand holding the long blade suddenly retracted and was about to escape. At this moment, everyone could see that Yi Shiwen's breakthrough was inevitable. Yi Shiwen did not give him a chance at all. He smashed the martial emperor seal and immediately smashed the arm into a bloody mist. At the same time, Yi Shiwen finally completed his transformation and became a heavenly venerate. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.